Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Games Done Classic. Welcome back. This is a look back at legendary GDQ moments with the legends that made them happen. And we've got a show for you today. But before we get to that, folks, just to remind you, AGDQ 2021 online is complete, and we raised $2.77 million for now. As a reminder that all of GDQ's portions of subs, gift subs, Prime Gaming subs, and bits cheered on the GDQ Twitch channel for the month of January will be donated to the Prevent Cancer Foundation. So, GDQ Hotfix, you're looking at it right now, is a series of shows that happens every week here on Games Done Quick. And information on all of our Hotfix shows is available at gamesdonequick.com/hotfix. If you're watching this on YouTube and would like to support our live content, please consider checking out our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/GDQ. And if you have an Amazon Prime account, you can subscribe to any Twitch channel of your choice every month for free. Please consider using your Prime Gaming account to subscribe to the GDQ Twitch channel. If you want to watch any previous GDQ Hotfix shows, you can go to youtube.com/gamesdonequick and check out our archives of live shows there. This Tuesday, folks, coming up, we have Time Capsule, a show all about speedruns that were released in the same calendar year. Tune in as Smooth Operative takes us through a year in speedrunning starting at 7 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday. Okay, well, you're here, folks. This is Games Done Classic, where we're looking back at classic, legendary moments from GDQ events with the people that made them happen. My name is Lat Mackey. If you're not familiar with me, I'm a speedrunner, a diehard speedrunning fan. I geek out on all this stuff. And today is going to be part 2 of the history of TASBot and the performances and the presentations that the entire TASBot team has put on at all of these GDQs. The guests today are going to include Duango AC, Ty Kevin 83, and Onosaurus. Who are going to be joining us a little bit later. But we're going to first start, because if you haven't watched part 1, please go back and do so if you're watching this on YouTube. But if you're here with us live on Twitch, we're going to jump right in because we have a lot to get to. Duango, how are you? Welcome back. How's everything going?
I am so glad to be back. I am super happy to be here. I can tell you that what we're going to be talking about first with the AGDQ 2017 block has me extremely excited because it's one of the most complex things that I think we could ever possibly do, and certainly the most complex we ever have done. And it needs some more light of day. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, so am I. And I think, it's helpful because we're going to take a little bit of a discussion here before we actually get into playing the run, because this is one of the most complex, sophisticated things I have ever seen presented anywhere, not just at a GDQ, but just the level of technicality that went into this had to be kind of off the charts. I guess, where do we start with this? Let's say, where did the idea for AGDQ 2017 presentation start? How did this whole thing happen?
Oh, man. Mistakes were made. So let me first say this. What you're about to hear is full of spoilers from start to finish. So if you have not watched the AGDQ 2017 run, I encourage you to go pause this. If you're watching on YouTube later, go pause this, watch it later. But even if you have no exposure whatsoever to what you're about to hear, I guarantee this will still entertain you. You're just going to hear some of the punchlines before the rest of it gets, how do I say it? So you're going to see the punchline because you're going to hear the sausage being made, is the best way to phrase it.
Spoilers ahead. It's okay to say.
Spoilers ahead. So where did this idea come from? Well, something that I've never been able to show you. I don't think anyone at GDQ has ever seen what I'm about to show you because it's always been impossible to get it across the country for you. I have something that you will find quite interesting. There's not really a good way to phrase this. This thing is so heavy. This thing weighs about 20 pounds. It's like 18, 20 pounds. It is a really, really heavy GeekPwn grenade trophy that we received based on a crazy payload that you guys saw at AGDQ and didn't even know it came from China. This thing is ridiculously heavy. I'm going to put this over. I feel like I'm sent all of a sudden. So that huge trophy is because of what we were able to do with Super Mario Brothers 3, we surprised the GeekPwn committee members substantially, and they awarded us with that giant thing. I've never been able to properly share it with the people who actually mattered there, people like Total and Micro 500, all of the other folks that were involved in making the Super Mario Brothers 3 payload happen. But I got ahead of myself. Here's why they gave us that crazy thing. We broke the living daylights out of Super Mario Brothers 3 repeatedly. The first time we did it, we covered it briefly for SGDQ 2016, where we were able to end Super Mario Brothers Super Mario Brothers 3 within the first second. Actually, it was 17 frames after. We delayed it a little bit so that you could see the curtain coming down, just so the effect would be visible on screen. But we figured out a way to jump to the end credits. But do we have that Super Mario Brothers 3 run up that you can display?
Yeah, absolutely.
I only see a static image for me.
No problem. We can actually go to it right now.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's important to talk about this run because it is so utterly insane. Okay, let me start this off. The controller protocol on the Nintendo has some interesting quirks to it. Because the original Nintendo was released with a hardware flaw that they had to patch after the fact. So what you're seeing now in this run, it starts off fairly normal. We're just moving to a section of the level where we can start manipulating things. But you'll notice the game is actually ridiculously laggy. And that's because we forced all of those Koopas to stay in memory. In other words, the game is tracking the position of these 4 Koopa shells. And we're knocking them around the level so that as they, wherever they were hit and wherever they last left the screen is kept in memory. And right here, we're using the exact same trick we used back in SGDQ 2016 to force the game to execute what was in that memory address space as code, which allowed us to jump to the controller ports to execute arbitrary code, at which point we showed off this rather demo scene-esque display. It's basically us demonstrating that we had completely taken over the video game console at that point. This was the fastest way we had been able to find to get total control of Super Mario Bros. 3. But this payload wasn't why we ended up with that award. What we did, which you don't see here, because we took it off the screen before it happens, when this demo ends, we program in a totally new payload that allows us to play, I believe it's 7-bit, 52 kilohertz mono audio through the controller ports of the Nintendo console. So we totally took control of this console just to play mono audio. Take that off the screen. That was the whole purpose.
So, okay, you're gonna have to just to take that just one then slightly step back. Was that the original plan? Like, what we're working towards, and for those, I'm just gonna let you. What we're working towards is some really interesting, complex things coming up towards the end of the run. And I'm curious why it was important to get a hold of mono audio output through an NES.
So obviously, let me actually answer your question in a roundabout way.
Okay.
When we did the GeekPwn presentation, it was just showing that audio could be played through the controller ports of a Nintendo, and we'd figured out how to do it. We demonstrated it at GeekPwn. I specifically picked a Chinese song. It was popular at the time, and played back that audio for them. And they were just amazed that the Nintendo console had the capacity to play back audio of that quality. The original Nintendo could sometimes play back speech. One of the games that did this was a game called High Speed. It would pause everything and play back speech clips. Well, there's some distracting photos that I'm loving right now.
You're reliving the 2017 there.
Oh, man, that was a crazy time. Yeah, looking at this picture alone, you can see that there was so much complexity going on. We had to develop an entirely new board to be able to shove data through the controller ports fast enough to do what we were doing. And that's where Total, and we're going to be talking about replay devices a lot later, but that's where Total made this PSOC5 board. This PSOC5 board, it's a dev kit that we've adapted with a board that Micro 500 put together. I've got some Legos here that we put together. I believe it was Micro 500 who went with his girlfriend to go get a whole bunch of Lego pieces so he had better mounting for these. At GDQ, if I remember correctly. Anyway, this board has the ability to take in input from a computer and send it to a Nintendo in a way that it thinks it's a real controller. You can see some more information about this in the last episode. I believe it was the most recent episode of Games Done Classic, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. That was the last one we did.
Yeah. So the basic of it was that we knew the TASLink board couldn't send data fast enough for what we wanted to do. So Total developed this PSOC5 based board. We used that design to send audio using the same samples that you would store in a ROM cartridge. If you've ever listened to Super Mario Bros. 3, you'll notice that the game audio is actually quite a lot more interesting than Super Mario Bros. 1. Yeah. And that's because it takes advantage of something called PCM audio samples. If you know that steel drum sound effect in Super Mario Bros. 3 that's classic in the soundtrack, that's actually a sample of a real steel drum being played back. It's just a small, short audio clip. It's not very high quality, and of course, the original Nintendo was only a mono console. It couldn't do stereo. But the ROM size on a cartridge was only so large. If you have a copy of Super Mario Bros. 3, inside of this is a mapper, and that mapper has the ability to switch between banks of memory. So basically, there's more memory physically in this cartridge than the Nintendo can access all at once. So it's swapping what window of memory it's looking at all the time. They were able to store extra data in here for audio clips, basically small, short segments of things like drums, the steel drums, and other things to make the audio sound better. So this is a PCM-based game. And in fact, it's one of the issues around that PCM audio that is what we're taking advantage of, but that's a whole other ball of wax.
Well, it does.
Point is,
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The point is that we're doing the exact same type of audio that an existing cartridge can do. We're just doing it at the highest fidelity that the audio processor in the original Nintendo could handle, and we're able to do it continuously because we're just feeding in a constant stream of data. We don't have to worry about how much space it's taking up on the cartridge. Go ahead.
So you already mentioned it, and we'll see that we're using multiple consoles to get where we're trying to go with this presentation.
Right.
For this console, are you using an original SMB3 cart? Is there some other cart that you had to do, or is there a certain version you needed to get this to work?
So there are a couple of different versions of Super Mario Bros. 3. There happen to be some subtle nuances and differences between the two. I actually only have the one cartridge here. The other one's actually on the other side of the room. But this is a PRG 0 versus PRG 1. There's subtle differences, but in reality, we could have made it work with either one of them. It's just it would have desynchronized if we had coded for the wrong one. So yeah, it did matter, but we were running on completely original hardware. Well, the only modifications that had been made to it were to clean up the analog video signal, basically what you might have heard of as an NES RGB mod. But I've confirmed repeatedly that that has no bearing whatsoever on how the console actually performs. It doesn't change its speed or anything like that because it's an analog solution. So yeah, totally original hardware, totally original cartridge, nothing funky.
So we're going to be moving on and moving over to, I believe, Mega Man's the next one. Is there a specific sequence that these games had to be presented and taken over the way that they were?
So no, but yes. Or yes, but no. Yes, but actually no. We could have done it in any order, but it made the most sense to go in the order we did. The left... let me back up.
Sure.
Hi, you're about to see Mega Man. Go ahead and play it. We're basically doing the exact same thing. We're finding an exploit that was known that allows us to execute arbitrary code, at which point we're able to take over the entire video game console and put our own payload on there. And we made our own operating system, effectively. So you'll see that coming up here in just a second. It'll take a little while to jump ahead to it. But the effective consequence of that is that we had two separate Nintendo consoles, each with their own methods and own games that allowed us to get to the point where we could execute code on the raw hardware. And at that point, we executed pretty much the same code. Mono, 7-bit, 52 kilohertz audio, 16-bit mono audio. No, I'm sorry, yeah, okay. No, yeah, 7-bit, 7-bit, 52 kilohertz mono audio. I got it right that time. It actually says it on the screen. You'll see it at the end. So now we have two of these, and we've connected both of them to a Linux computer. The reason we did it is because the Nintendo is a mono console, and we wanted to do stereo. So
You're getting there, and I'm curious what you explained pretty well what made SMB3 a perfect game to have this happen. Does Mega Man have some of those similar qualities, or is there a reason that you also chose Mega Man to take full control of, for lack of a better word?
So we just took full control of Mega Man right here, although it's not obvious because we first jump to the end credits and leave a loop in that allows us to hijack the game further, at which point this bizarre thing happens, and TMR did his best to try to keep up.
Right. It's like, what's happening?
He didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
He did his best to try to read this. And also, if you've never seen this before, if you're old enough, you know this screen. It didn't
Absolutely.
look like that, but you know this screen.
Yes.
There are so many little nuanced things in here. There's so many little Easter eggs on this one screen. I can't even begin to describe them all. But that is the actual CPU and the actual memory of a Nintendo console on that screen there. This was all faked. It was just us advancing graphics on the screen. Nothing strange. This was us being able to run anything we wanted to. And at that point, the hardware was our canvas, in the same way that someone writing a demo scene production can do whatever they like with the canvas of a old console. And so we decided to put Windows 3.1 on it.
So is this actually Windows 3.1, or is this something we're just is this a GUI of some sort we're
It's
looking
just
at?
graphics. It's just graphics.
Okay.
It's completely fake.
Got it.
We uploaded images, and then this was a couple of sprites we uploaded and gave instructions on how to move to recreate the classic flying toaster screensaver.
Bringing me back.
So,
Reliving the glory days here.
You got to mess around with this kind of stuff. So you'll see that we cut off the video pretty quickly. In fact, I was like, no, dude, you got to turn the TV off because people were about to see what this payload is next. Both of them, spoiler alert, both of them were the same payload. They were both just mono audio. One we were using for the left, one we were using for the right. Now, we're ready to finally show Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, and this is where things get pretty crazy. We have left audio and we have right audio. What do you think we might be doing with Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past?
Question? You tell me.
So, thank you for hopping that on the screen there. The actual run, by the way, was really tricky because Link to the Past, real hardware, real cartridge. We weren't using an SD to SNES. We weren't using anything funny. This was a real Super Nintendo with a real cartridge in it. That also means that the Super Nintendo kicked our butts. It was a pain. One of the things about the lovely Super Nintendo, and this is a classic example of a really poor quality image, but this guy. So, not image, but just plastic has just not aged well. This guy has two separate clocks in it. It has the main CPU clock, and it also has a second APU, the audio processing unit. They're completely independent of one another. The main CPU clock runs at 21 megahertz. The sound clock runs at 24.576 megahertz. And there's no way to really keep them in sync. That basically means that sometimes when we were playing this game, we would pick up a rupee right there outside of Link's home. Now, in this case, we didn't. You can see on the screen, Link is now running through trees, doing some really, really strange stuff. We had some issues with desynchronization because sometimes the audio processing part of it would run a little faster or a little slower and we'd be off by one frame. Sometimes we would walk against the wood right there, those wood posts. We'd get stuck walking into them. A much more common desync is coming up here in a little bit, where we would get into a cave and Princess Zelda's message saying, "Help me, I'm in the castle," would pop up in a way that caused us to desynchronize. So we were kind of holding our breath throughout this whole run, hoping that nothing bad would happen. We still don't yet have a reliable way to control this, but I do have something I'm going to show later on in the run. It's a replay device called Tasha from TPW Rules that I'll be showing you guys later on in this series, but this episode. Okay, so right up here, we fall in this pit. And we had some major, well, you couldn't see us because we used a glitch to make us invisible. Right over here, this message would sometimes happen at the wrong time, and we wouldn't open up the chest to get these rupees. And then we would totally desync, and we wouldn't have enough rupees to continue the purchase of the bottle. So that section right there gave us just enough rupees to go down to the bottle, go down, not by the bottle, but get the bottle and then put the potion in the bottle, because the potion costs 150 here in the village. So we've got all these little dependencies, and we had all these possible things that going completely wrong. If you're familiar with Legend of Zelda weirdness, it seems like every single bizarre, broken Legend of Zelda run, for some odd reason, involves a bottle. Every time.
Yes. So like every modern games, I mean, it's just every version of Zelda.
So in order to use the glitch, we had to have the potion. Now you can see we laid a bomb down. We now have the bomb in our inventory. We're using corner boost type things right there that are only task viable, really. Some various different techniques to move around the overworld faster. Right there, you saw us take a little bit of speed boosts. These are all things that we would love to have explained more, but there's just never enough time. When you're on stage and you only have this amount of time, there's never enough time to do it all. Okay, you're about to see some really crazy stuff. So we swap over to that potion, and at this exact moment, we now have complete control of the Super Nintendo. So we made it display the text Super N64. And would you pause right here?
Absolutely.
I will take full responsibility for the consequences of what happens next. So before we go on,
yes,
I made the choice to basically make an act of it, of not really explaining to anyone what was going on, not telling anyone in the audience what we had done at this point. You now know that we took over the left audio channel and the right audio channel we made a left audio channel and a right audio channel by taking over two different Nintendos. Right at this point, we completely took over a Super Nintendo, and the image you see that says Super Mario 64 is us pushing button presses and controller inputs over between one of these PSOC5 boards into that console. You can see on below me in that screenshot, there's all of these visualization boards. That's showing we had 4 separate controllers connected to the Super Nintendo, and we were sending data at the maximum possible speed to literally send video frames, one at a time, to the console.
I guess my head kind of explodes when you explain that, because not explain it, but how many inputs does it take just to get one image of this kind of quality through a Super Nintendo that way?
Well, seeing as we could not send compressed anything, we did not have any capacity whatsoever. We did not have even a single CPU cycle left there was no room for anything left over. That's why we couldn't do any audio. We literally could not do audio on the Super Nintendo because we were using every last bit of processing power that this thing had in order to get what you're about to see. So go ahead and resume the video. Now that you know what we're looking at, look at how crazy good the quality of this is. So you've got the Super Mario 64 logo. It's one thing, but then it pops in with Mario's head. And quite honestly, having played on a real Nintendo 64, the frame rate is not far off.
No. I mean, doesn't Ocarina of Time run at like 15 or 20 frames? I mean, it's really pretty slow.
So right here, you can see some of the different colors of blue are represented here. But then we have to introduce other colors like the red and the gray of the castle. And then there's yellow there. And now we have to do the green of the trees and all this crazy stuff. Keep in mind, the original hardware that we're playing on, the unmodified hardware, can only show 256 colors at once. So we cheated by resampling every 10 frames and figuring out what kind of dithering we needed to do to only show 256 colors at a time, but constantly cycle through the 65,000 colors that the Nintendo was capable of showing. So
we have the time, and I'm going to pause for just a moment again, Doingo, because I think there's some really interesting and important things happening. But I'm curious, what was the discovery that led to this possibility being even possible and happening? Like, there had to have been at some point some discovery that made you think you could do this. So what is that? How did we get to this point?
I made the mistake of asking P4+2 and Master June and other people who are far smarter than me, is this possible? No, really, what is possible? How far can we go? And I was a complete, utter pain in the butt and kept asking for a long time. as we kept trying experiments and we kept trying different things. And this is also a point where I have to pause and say, specifically to Micro 500, I am really sorry. And I mean that because I pushed too hard.
I have heard you mention that before, and I know from the bottom of your heart how you feel at this point, because you keep. I mean, we're 3 years later, and you're still 4 years later, and it's still. But the interesting thing is that it definitely showed us, the world, the community, that something like this is possible, and then all of a sudden things. Now we have this endless creativity. These world of possibilities that could happen, as you're about to see.
Yeah, it's also feel free to allow this part to continue. This whole section is actually pretty darn long, but we brought in a good commentator to describe what was happening. What we didn't get was the attribution, and I've talked about this so many times. Just like I just mentioned that Micro 500 didn't get enough credit for this, the same thing happened to these poor SM64 runners. We had communicated with the community that we were going to do this, that we were going to show this run. And we didn't get all of the information to tech. It was already extremely complicated as it was. Their names did not get shown on the screen here. There's a huge, long list of authors that put their time and effort into making this. I believe this is a 1-star TAS, if I'm not mistaken. Or is this one?
I think this is a 1-star one. Yeah, it's the 1-star.
Yeah, because we got it down to 0 too, which is nuts. But anyway, we talked to them ahead of time. I had the list of authors to provide attribution for. Man, I should actually have that up right now. I should have this information up to tell you right here where it is. But we didn't get that on screen. So the only person that was here was Tampa, who was actively involved in making the task, but was not the only person. And he'd been a lot more involved in other Mario games and Zelda games as well. So I don't know as if he actually has any input in this particular run of Super Mario 64, actually, now that I say that. But he was definitely instrumental in the Legend of Zelda Link to the Past portion, which Arkin also contributed to.
Thank you for reminding me. It's
this
one
SM64
key,
run
0 stars. That's what this run is.
Yes, 1 key, 0
That's
stars.
right.
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
You can tell we're SM64 runners here, aren't we? Definitely not.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I am not. So I also need to tie together one other thing. So other than the aspect that an absolutely massive number of people contributed to what you're seeing on the screen, there's also the element of how the heck did you tie all of this together? And again, credit to Micro 500, who literally burned himself out because of me incessantly pushing to push this a little farther and a little farther and a little farther. If I had been a lot more in my right mind, I would have paused and said, you know what? Mono audio is fine. They'll never notice it. We would have had one console for mono audio and one console for the video. We would have been able to get them in sync with one another, and it would have been fine. Nope. I had to go above and beyond, but we've got 2 games we can do Ace on. We can do stereo. And Micro 500's life became hell because he put so many hours into bash scripts and different Python scripts and different directory structures and a list of things he had to do in order, along with Ilari doing crazy FFmpeg stuff, all kinds of things to try to stitch together 3 separate output sources and keep them in sync. And at the beginning of Super Mario 64, it's actually not a very good sync. The left and right audio channels had this weird parallax sound to it because they're off a little bit. The left channel is not playing at the same time as the right. There's a little delay between the two. They're both more or less close enough to the video that it doesn't matter, but they were definitely off. If I had a chance to go back and do this again, I would have shown only Super Mario Bros. 3 and only Legend of Zelda leading into the video payload, because it would have reduced complexity quite a bit. I'm happy that we got it working, but it came at the cost of Micro 500 hitting maximum burnout and choosing to never participate in this kind of work again. And for that, I am extremely repentant. I pushed him way too hard, and I really regret that.
I hear what you're saying, and I will say that I am so thankful for his work because we do have this presentation that we saw. So, we can be thankful for the work that he has done and completed and shown us here. I was question for you is, did it have to be Link to the Past? Is that the game that I know that because there's arbitrary code execution in many different Super Nintendo games? Was a Link to the Past for demonstration purposes, or was it specifically needed for this type of? I'm going to stop here for just 1 second before we move into Portal.
Yeah, we probably should, because Portal is going to take a whole other extra bit of explanation. Link to the Past was us scrambling because we failed.
Oh, interesting.
I'm really sorry to P4+2. He had his heart set on showing Donkey Kong Country 2. And to this day, we still don't have a 100% completely reliable method of doing Donkey Kong Country 2. But we're getting very, very close thanks to efforts from Onosaurus. But that's 3 years later. So more on that in a later part of this episode. But we could not get Donkey Kong Country 2 to be reliable. And a lot of it comes down to that explanation I gave earlier. There's 2 separate processors. They are not in lockstep. And you can end up, what we call spin locking, you can end up with a situation where events happen in such a way that you're off 1 frame. The only way that TASBot can work, it's not artificial intelligence. It's not responsive to anything. In fact, it's all just blindly pushing a sequence of button presses 1 frame at a time, 1 second at a time, 1 minute at a time, from the beginning of the run to the end of the run, with the only information you have from the console being, hey, I'm ready for the next bit of input. The only thing that a replay device, or TASBot or mascot as it is,
Yes.
hears is the game asking, hey, I'm ready for the next bit of input. It's nothing more and nothing less than us replying 1 button press at a time, 1 input at a time, over and over and over again in sequence. If even one of those requests is duplicated or missing, everything unravels. And the reason for that is because these consoles didn't have a source of randomness, of entropy seeding. They didn't have anything else to use to start the process of a random number generation and send it through a pseudo-random number generator other than player input. The reason we can get away with all of these things, the only reason this works, is because we fully control the only source of randomness, the only seed of those PRNG algorithms. So if we have even one thing that acts differently, we risk a desync. And that was why, even in Legend of Zelda Link to the Past, we still had those risks. Sometimes we would collect a rupee, sometimes we wouldn't. Other alignments we did would allow Link to end up back in the right place. We don't encounter any major enemies or other obstacles in the run we just showed you. It's possible to have a little bit of slop. But a game like Super Metroid, that's going to desync like crazy because there's enemies everywhere. It's extremely precise. And the insanity there is something we'll be talking about in a future part of the episode as well. All of that to say, we really wanted to show what P4+2 had done for Donkey Kong Country 2, and we couldn't.
There is a great comment in the chat that says TASBot is a player piano.
Yes, that is correct, and that is how I have defined it. Very much the right way to describe it. A player piano is a piano roll of paper, usually with perforations in it, holes punched in it, going through, playing back 1 set of notes at a time, and then the next set of notes. Same way that we would press a set of buttons on a frame, and then the next set of buttons on the next frame. Exactly the same concept. They are identical in execution, which is funny because the concept of what TASBot does was effectively invented in the 1700s.
Of course, why not? Everything old is new again, right?
So with that all out of the way, is there anything else you want to ask about Super Mario 64 before we move on to Portal?
I think we're ready to move on. I think there's so much attribution to give, but you're talking about an army, literally just a massive amount of people who went into this. And so let's why Portal? How Portal? What exactly? How did this come about?
We gave people the option of Portal versus Super Smash Brothers. In other words, Valve versus Nintendo. And people overwhelmingly voted for Valve. So there was a bid war going on between those 2 franchises, and they picked Valve, so we showed Portal. Now, a little context here, and this is a little bit of a sensitive topic. I have to be careful how I phrase this. At one point in time, we did show a run of Ikaruga at GDQ that was not console verified, and we did it poorly. We had issues with the emulator, so we showed a video. The video player itself was visible. It was kind of janky. It just did not land right at all. And that left a bitter taste in people's mouths on the GDQ selection committee. So we were basically limited to content that we could do console verification on out of all of that. Unfortunately, that means that some runs cannot be shown in the current context. I am hopeful that at some point we can move past that in some way, because there's a lot of really amazing runs that are on platforms that we will never really be able to console verify. Portal is definitely one of those runs, and we realized that the only way, based on the rules at the time, that we could show this run was to shove it as video through a Super Nintendo. So we did.
This is incredible. So, was this a tool-assisted speedrun that already existed, or was one created specifically for this performance?
So this is a tool-assisted speedrun that already existed, and boy, I should have been smart and got my credits up beforehand, so I had all the list of authors for this on screen. But so feel free to continue playing here.
Okay,
here
we go.
This is Portal 1, being played through a Super Nintendo. The one downside is that the Super Nintendo could only do about 10 frames a second, and that does become apparent in some of this. But at the same time, for all of the people that complained a little bit about it, I rewatched this a little while ago and went, man, this is actually pretty good.
Yeah, it looks good. It's operating well. I mean, we're not talking. Yes, it's at 10 frames a second, but you get over that. I mean, this is kind of wild what we're looking at.
It's really insane. This is also a good example of talking about that that effect of requantizing our colors, or looking at the last 5 frames and the next 5 frames and making a decision in 10-frame chunks of which palette to use and adapting that for every section. We did this on the fly for later content, but here we were able to pre-generate it to tune it so that we were able to get everything as high color depth as possible. So again, I can't emphasize this enough. What you're looking at really is playing on a Super Nintendo. If the Super Nintendo had infinite memory and infinite capacity to do these things, you could easily have this quality of fidelity on a real Super Nintendo. You could go through an expansion port. You could do a specifically modified cartridge. You could do all kinds of things and produce video of this caliber with the hardware that they had in the 1990s. It just would have been prohibitively expensive.
Well, and I guess that's, this Portal never came out on a home console, definitely not a Nintendo console. This was a PC game. Were there challenges in that conversion, or I'm not even sure I'm using the right terminology, but there had to have been some challenges just to have that work in the first place, right?
So that's where FFmpeg and open source software is a really, really awesome thing. So, hi, in addition to being Dwango AC, keeper of TASBot, I am also president of the North Bay Linux Users Group and an advocate for open source software and the Linux operating system. So it's really important to me to be able to do things with open source software, because we were able to take open source FFmpeg and adapt it to stream content from a video source directly through a series of scripts that then came out as a series of button presses, thanks to work from Alari and a lot of other folks, that could then be displayed on screen. In other words, we had an entire pipeline to take any arbitrary video, even live video, shove it through the controller ports of the Super Nintendo and display it with about a 0.5 second delay, about 5 frames, which at 10 frames a second we're running at means about half a second or so of delay. That's all it took. So from the moment that we received the video, it was half a second before it appeared on the Super Nintendo, and that was just the processing to get all of the button presses in order.
I guess this is as good a time as any, because there are still more to come in this presentation, which is just mind-blowing. But first of all, had you had this working before you got on the GDQ stage? Is this the first time it worked, or had it been tested and actually had tested successfully?
I'm going to answer that 2 different ways.
Okay.
The first is that, yes, we had it working in the practice room. We had massive problems in the practice room because these dev kit boards were, they're cheap $10 boards. The USB port on here, this USB micro port, ripped off of 2 of our boards. Completely ripped off because they were not very well soldered on. They weren't through-hole soldered. They were just surface mount. And we were in full-on panic mode. So we had it working, but I can't say it was necessarily working well. Certainly not at the reliability that we should have had. based on the outcome of AGDQ 2017, I made a number of changes, and a number of things changed in my life as a result. There was definitely some personal pain out of the consequences of running this to the very last minute. And when I say running this to the very last minute, I mean we were literally making changes to the credit screen that you'll see at the end as we were walking on stage. Some of that was triggered by events I won't get into, but long and the short of it, this was definitely a case of we were tweaking and modifying until the very last minute, and that had dire consequences. The first being, of course, I mentioned that Micro 500 left. Unfortunately, Assassinator also left, for anyone who knows who she was. That was much more life-altering for me. The years to come led to a lot of pain. I actually stepped away for a little bit to try to recover from AGDQ 2017's consequences, and I think it was the right choice to do that. As a result of AGDQ 2017's last-minute scramble, we fundamentally changed how we handle this type of content, which has led to its own challenges. The biggest thing is that we no longer work on things until the last minute. We have what we're doing done by the time the submission window opens. And if we don't have it done by the time the GDQ submission window for content opens, we don't show it. We are done with doing silly things. Now, we regressed a little bit for SmashBot. Just going to be honest. Not SmashBot, MashBot. Sorry, there's SmashBot and MashBot, and I love dyslexia. MashBot was a regression to our earlier days. There are specific reasons about that I'll talk about later in the episode, but yeah, I'm piling this up with so much content.
No,
but the long and the short of it.
Go ahead, finish.
Long and the short of it is that we couldn't keep doing this. We were dead tired, constantly showing up on stage, frazzled, not enough sleep, everything constantly. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? We had to stop doing that. There was one aspect of that that has been a bit of a problem. We don't get preferential treatment. The Games Done Quick selection committee doesn't pick our content over anyone else. We have to compete on equal footing. And that means we can't go to them ahead of time and say, hey, we would like to make this thing. They won't answer the question. They basically, if I ask, hey, if we build this thing, would you want to show it? They have never once answered that question, which is fine. It's them showing impartiality, which is what I want them to do. But it also means that we can't really do an event as large as what you just saw. We can't do another AGDQ 2017 because we could build it and not be able to show it. Right. So it has had that one consequence. But on the other hand, our stress levels are so much less because we have everything done before the event. And we actually chose to defer a submission. We could have tried to rush it and shown Freedom Planet for SGDQ 2020, but we opted to, because of that policy of we don't have it done by submissions, we're going to delay. We actually delayed it to the AGDQ 2021 submissions, and it was the right thing to do. So that's basically the biggest change that came out of all of this. But back to your questions.
I wanted, first of all, let me just thank you for your honesty about this, because I think that it's important and it's a really good lesson to learn about what goes into a public performance on this level and on this scale. That you all at home, you all know this, that Games Done Quick, these events, there could be anywhere, there's hundreds of thousands of people at times who are watching these things happen. And so the lessons that you learn are important ones. And for anybody who wants to do things like this, because we want to see these things at Games Done Quick, we as I'm a fan and as a viewer, just seeing some of these wonderful, kind of outrageous performances and presentations are amazing. But there's something that actually does happen behind the scenes. And so Dwayne, I just want to, first of all, thank you for your honesty and thank you for highlighting some of these issues, that there are real people behind these things, and we have real issues that we all, we have to deal with. And that's kind of where I actually wanted to go a little bit next before we start this next portion. And that is, what was it like to set up, put us on stage there? What was it like to set up all this? Because we see some of our favorite speedrunners on stage. We see you, we see the team, we see this massive amount of hard work. Just the setup for this had to have been kind of a task to get it happening.
And that brings us right back to the same attribution thing. I can't thank the people that were there enough. Media Magnet, thank you. You did so much work that doesn't get paid attention to at that event. your name is not on any of the runs. You weren't a task author. You weren't the person who made the specific tools, and yet you were behind the scenes doing so much little things, just helping us get it working. Thank you. I could single out half a dozen people. I tried to look up the list of everyone that was involved, and the names were so long that it was impossible. How did this work? Largely Micro 500, because I got sick the week of this event. I ended up with a stomach bug of some sort. I remember laying on the floor of a storage room that GDQ was using at the hotel because through a snafu, we didn't have a bed that night. For some reason, we were between hotel rooms because of the way we were traveling, and I just remember being dead tired, laying on the floor of the hotel in a disused room, dying. So Micro 500 takes on and shoulders the entire weight of trying to organize this thing. Again, huge credit to him for not losing his mind. Because when I got back and I saw he had everything handled, I fell straight into, oh, well, what things do we need to do? Well, I have contacts with this person, and there's a photographer over here, and oh, we want to do a photo shoot with TASBot over here, so I'll take TASBot and take him to the arcade room and have him play a video game. And we'll have him playing DDR and make a very fun photo shoot. And oh, well, we've got the journalist here. Kyle Orland from Ars Technica is here. Okay, well, I got to interface with him. And oh, I should go talk to tech. Micro 500 was in the background piecing together who was going to be bringing what on stage, sending people off to go get Legos. He does all kinds of stuff. Man, I can't even begin to describe how much effort he put in trying to organize all this being on stage.
It sounds like quite a bit, and because of we're already pushing quite a bit of time spent on this, I'm going to start us back up. And where are we going next after seeing Mario 64 and Portal?
So this segment we might not watch the entirety of because it's at a certain point you're just like, what on earth are we even watching? But we start with Portal, and by now we've got it cropped properly. Okay, you might actually want to fast forward. Sure. Up to the beginning of the next section, if you can. It might be kind of tricky to find it. Basically, what we're looking for is the beginning of the next section where we transition from this Portal screen.
Oh, I just
back up just a little bit.
Apologies. There we go.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, right around there. Yeah, perfect. I do want to be conscientious of our time. I know that we were going to be taking a break in about 10 minutes, so the only way to get through this is to be much faster. The reason we spent so much time talking about this is because of the hype. We wrote that on screen. Micro 500 put a lot of scripting effort into making it say Skype instead. This was a time when yelling hype was about as crazy as yelling orb. All of that is successive drawing on screen of extra elements, one little bit at a time using a protocol that was developed. Huge efforts by Ilari, Micro 500, and others, P4+2, Masterjun, making this happen. At this point, we now have a portal that we're pointing through an FFmpeg script to any arbitrary video source we like. Anything. Our Skype call was actually James Chen over Discord, over Hangout, over Google Hangout.
So what's the testing? Like, how did you know that this was going to work? I mean, is it just because you trust the protocols that you put in place and you know how some of these things work? Like, because this seems like a pretty big risk. I mean,
it was, and he couldn't hear us at all. Our microphone didn't come through. It was supposed to, but for some reason didn't. Was never patched through to him, so he couldn't hear us. If you're not familiar with James Chen, he is a well-known announcer in esports area. And overall, just a randomly good guy.
There's a photo of him, and he's actually using a phone to do this. And, so he had to do this over Wi-Fi. There's 2,000 people in the audience. I mean, even just using Wi-Fi is a huge risk. I mean, did you do any testing with this beforehand, or was this where you're just keeping the fingers crossed?
So GDQ wireless, for anyone who's actually been at a GDQ, is notoriously unreliable. So we got permission to hop on the tech wireless, and even then, as you see, it's not perfect. He looks like he had a big chunk torn out of his nose there for a second. But, I mean, it's no different than any Zoom call all of you have been subjected to in the last year of COVID. He's currently wandering around the classic AGDQ hotel, the hotel that was used the most number of years, and he's now walked into the room, and people in that room saw themselves on the projector screens at the front of the room. It was a really epic moment at that point because everyone in the audience was like, man, this is insane. This is actually happening. So they're waving. He couldn't hear us very well until he got in the room, and it was kind of complicated. So he started pointing the camera at random people, and we had multiple cameras. We had multiple people with viewports, and we were just switching which video feed we were watching. Micro 500 had put a ton of effort into making that happen. So this was a half-second delay. Like I said, about 5 frames of latency. There's Sassy Netter, some other folks. I see Ted in the background. I think the camera flips over to show Muffins. You might know Muffins. She's well known on GDQ. There's Muffins. Oh, there's Ted. I see Ted.
It's so unbelievable that it was almost. I remember watching this live at home, and I almost didn't believe what I was seeing and understanding what I was seeing, because I mean it reminds me of almost like the Game Boy camera, or something of the 16-bit era camera trying to make it work, because obviously you're having to make some compromises here to get this video actually on.
Yeah, you can only
screen.
put 256 colors, so now we have 256 colors of the underside of Vulgin's nose. As for some reason he decided to walk around the hallway pointed at the ceiling. We're still not sure what he was up to, and he couldn't hear us at all. But eventually, he points his phone sideways at the game room. So you're getting a tour of behind the scenes. And in fact, a little later on in this clip, you'll see him walk into the casual room. You're getting to see parts of Games Done Quick that the people at home who have never been to an event in live never get to see. This is a sideways view of all the arcade machines that were set up thanks to MagFest and, I believe, Tokyo Attack prior to their dissolution. There's so much stuff that goes on at a main GDQ. If you ever get a chance, go to one. It's really fun. But go ahead.
It's a great way to see some of that, just because you're right. That's not a place that we get a chance to see if you're watching this from home.
Yeah. So obviously this is stacked technology. We had the 10 frames a second of the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo payload that we had to deal with. We were still sending all the audio through the 2 Nintendos, by the way. That was still a thing. There's the casual room. He's wandering around in the casual room. You can see that the palette swapping that we're doing allows you to pick up those blues, and then the blue palette gets completely removed. When there's no blue on screen, we free up those blue colors for other things. Finally, on screen, you can see, hello, what you are listening to now is 7-bit PCM audio at 54 kilohertz. I forgot we got it at 54. Streamed through the controller ports. And the Mega Man is saying basically the same thing in different words on the other side. So there were our left and right audio channels. We had the Super Nintendo there in the lower left corner. It's still taking in all of its data over the controller ports. This was a combination of so many different pieces and so many different people to make happen, and was absolutely insane.
It's almost not quite fathomable that accessing a console and a game through the controller ports allows you to do these things. And, you make it sound so simple. This is just, all we're doing is like playing a piano, whatever you input in, but to actually see this in practice and to have all of this set up. I mean, I see people with laptops on the, on the live cab and everything like that. There was obviously quite, when you mentioned, we've already gone over a lot of this, quite a bit that goes on to make this happen. It's still it's really tough to even fathom that this happened and you were able to pull this off with this. I mean, and the camera feed works. Everything was working. Is there something that didn't quite work, or perhaps the way you didn't want it to, or at the end of this was just happy to get where you were ending up?
As you've heard, I have a large number of disappointments from this, and the audience response being so negative was by far the hardest to deal with. I went into a full-on depression after this particular event that really was deeply unpleasant and unhelpful, had major consequences. And the reason for that is because people just didn't appreciate what we had done, to the point that it became extremely toxic and negative on Reddit and YouTube comments. And some of that was well placed. The number one mistake that they felt, other than attribution, which I've harped on over and over again, and it's still a thing I really want to figure out how to resolve so we never have to deal with this again. Other than attribution, the biggest thing is I made a personal choice to play off some of the things as a banter, especially during the Portal run. What's going to happen? As if we didn't know. Turns out that wasn't the right way to go. They did not appreciate the commentary on that. The Super Mario 64 community didn't like that their names weren't shown, which I agree. I didn't like that either. The biggest thing is that we went in without explaining to people all of the things that you've just heard. They didn't know that it was a Nintendo playing audio. They're just like, what is this trickery? Why are you showing me low quality, crappy video on screen? Why is this run so awful to look at? Why is there no context for what's going on? So I wish I had done many of those things differently. In retrospect, I would do it differently. I would not try to hide it. I would try to explain, guys, this is what's actually happening. Let's see how far we can push this. And I would have done it very differently. But the negative comments can't be understated. The hate I received for this particular GDQ was beyond anything I have ever experienced, past or present.
It's one of those things where this is, I think it's also a challenge of speedrunning in that we're trying to convey a lot that's happening, a lot of amazing, incredible things that are happening, challenging things that are happening in a very short amount of time. And it's interesting. I played this video. This video is only this is only a half an hour, but I assume this process had to have taken months, years. Like, how long did it take to put this whole thing together? Because there's just so many thousands of hours that went into this thing.
About 11 months.
About 11 months.
Huge team. It was one of our most, other than Brain Age, it was the most extreme amount of workload we've ever had.
There are many different reasons we're taking time to highlight this, but one of them being that this is kind of a important moment in the life of TASBot presentations.
You can say pinnacle. It's true. This was the pinnacle of what we could do from a hardware perspective. And in fact, that was part of the problem. It was, okay, first you showed us this, then you showed us that, then you took over this game, then you took over that one. Now you've pushed it so far that you're playing full video and audio. What else are you going to, how are you going to top that? And the answer is we can't. And no. I don't want to. I only want to focus on, Onosaurus is reminding me, the MOS 3212 was also very heavily involved. Man, I hate it when I do this. There are so many people that were involved in these runs that I forget people. And it's not because I'm trying to slight anyone. It's just there's so many different moving pieces. This was the most ambitious thing we could have possibly done. There really wasn't a way to top this. And instead, after this run, we started to focus on, well, what other things can we do? What other areas of this art can we explore? What can we do to use this canvas in a way to show art in a different way that's not just pushing the console to every last ounce of CPU cycles it has left? So I'll answer it that way. This is a bittersweet run for me, but it really was the pinnacle of what we were able to achieve, and I don't think we're ever going to be able to top it.
Well, and I'm going to mention it again, Duango. I appreciate you taking the time to go over this run in this kind of detail, because one of the things, you weren't able to do that on stage that day, and here we are having the benefit of hindsight, and to admit some things that we would have done differently, and also to highlight some amazing things that actually did happen, because you don't want to go. It's so important, the work that went into this to make it happen, because it's still one of those legendary moments. I mean, this did happen, and people did these things. This does exist. You can't ignore
it. Does
the fact
exist.
it did. Yeah.
And on that last point, I am doing the TASBot Revisited series. It's the most important thing to me over the next year is to go through all of the things, not just this run, but all the way back to the beginning of AGDQ 2014, where prior to that, in 2013, we were working our way up to the first Gradius run, and then the first Super Mario World run. I want to go back and dissect and do it properly. Have the time to do the research, have the time to do a video. If anyone listening to this wants to get involved in helping us with that, we already have a pretty good core team of video editors and audio editors that are on board. But if you want to help us with that, storyboarding, anything like that, please just hop into discord.tas.bot or just look for TASBot on the Discord community server list. We would love to have that help, because we want to take what we talked about in the last hour and spread it out over several episodes and dive into each part individually, do it right, properly provide attribution, and cover all this that we just kind of we just winged it in a live broadcast, but do it properly in a video like Summoning Salt.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful project. And don't worry, we're going to plug it multiple times during this broadcast, Duengo, because I think it's such an important project to really document all this. Folks, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We've got TASBot runs coming from 18, 19, and 2020 all ahead. We're going to bring in Ty Kevin 83. We're going to bring in Onosaurus. We have so much more to get to. We appreciate you all being here. More Games Done Classic, the history of TASBot Part 2, coming up in just a few minutes. Stand by. We'll be right back. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Games Done Classic, a look back at classic legendary GDQ moments with the legends that made them happen. Today, we are looking back at TASBot, the history of TASBot at GDQ events, Part 2. And I am super excited, really excited to welcome to the roundtable discussion, if you will, Ty Kevin 83 and Onosaurus to join Duengo and myself. And well, I guess first of all, welcome both of you. Thank you so much, everyone, all three of you. Thank you all for being here. This is great and wonderful. I'm excited to dive in here and chat some stuff. First things first, let's you already mentioned it a couple different times, Duengo, but I guess let's start talking a little bit about the hardware side of things. And you mentioned a replay device. What exactly is that? Let's dive into the hardware. Walk us through some of this a little bit.
So I'm going to steal one from Onosaurus. He's actually on the call with us right now. He's got much better models than I do, but this is just a 3D printed case. This is the only part you care about here. This is a replay device that has, in our case, RJ45 connectors on it, because that was the easiest way we could work with it. But all it really is, it's a device with a microcontroller on it that pretends to be a controller. In this case, this one is capable of pretending to be a Nintendo controller, a Super Nintendo controller, a Genesis controller, a Nintendo 64 controller. Onosaurus, what am I missing?
GameCube.
Oh, yes, and GameCube, yes. So we have these ports so that we can have different interchangeable cable types. So we just terminate the ends. Onosaurus actually just sent me a new set of cables, which I can throw on screen here. They are 3D printed. On one side is a normal network cable end. On the other side is, in this case, a Super Nintendo end. So we can just swap different cable types. I've got some that go to Nintendo instead of Super Nintendo, and so on and so forth. So
I wasn't sure if you could see barely in the corner of my camera a 1,000-foot spool of shielded Cat 5.
Nice.
It might barely be caught. Oh, no, it's on the other side. Oh, well. But yes, making cables in both.
So a replay device is nothing more and nothing less than a board that has the capability of pretending to be a controller for a video game console. What you do with that capacity is entirely up to software.
Interesting. Okay. Onosaurus, why don't I throw this over to you? How did you create your device, and what was kind of your thought process? What gave you these ideas to pursue something like this?
Sure. Well, back in the day, I joined the TASBot community, and I started off doing writing a command line interface for an already existing replay device, which was Micro 500's TASLink. Shortly thereafter, we had the PSOC 5 board that Duengo discussed. That's the one where the USB port fell off. And both of them did really wonderful things, and both of them had certain weaknesses. And my goal was basically to learn from my predecessors and, take the best parts of one, take the best parts of the other, have the benefit of hindsight, and create sort of a new generation device that succeeded at everything as best as possible. And in fact, to date, the TASLink is the only replay device that can control multiple consoles simultaneously, as you discussed in the previous TASBot retrospective of Games Done Classic, where you discussed the same inputs on Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, US, 2J, and 3. That's the only replay device that can do that. But aside from that, the replay device that I made called the TASTM32 can do pretty much everything the others can.
If you don't mind me asking,
and so
what's a little bit of your background? Like, had you worked and tinkered with hardware before? Was this one of your first projects? Just to kind of understand a little bit how you get to this thing.
Sure. Well, naturally, my background is that I'm a dentist.
Of course.
So okay, it's a little more than that. I am a computer science major who went into dentistry, but while I've been a programmer for most of my life because of computer science and before then, I had never really tinkered with hardware. I knew nothing about hardware. I didn't know what a capacitor really did. I didn't know anything, let alone programming microcontrollers and eventually building something like this. This is actually a newer version of what Dwango showed, and I made this. I designed the board in software. This particular one was machine manufactured, but most of them I soldered. I had never made a case before, but now it has this nice case. And basically all of this was learning from my predecessors, reaching out to the community, and taking the best parts of everything. And so I started. Hello?
Yes. Can you hear me? I'm fine. Yeah. Oh, okay. Apologies. So we're losing Onosaurus's stream here for a second. So we're going to get him back on here in just a moment as he's trying to reconnect. While we're waiting for Ona to join us again, a quick question for you, because this is actually a pretty good question in the chat. That are there games that a replay device don't work? And maybe I can throw this over to Ona, either one. But are there games because you mentioned it's just an input device, but are there games that it can or cannot work with?
So I'm going to answer this in one way, and perhaps we will revisit this. It is generally believed that disk-based games are difficult to console verify because the randomness of the positioning of the disk, different temperature changes on the laser, would result in non-deterministic loading behavior.
Yeah.
We might have evidence that this is no longer the case.
Yeah, just as a general rule, disk-based system, the entire CD format was designed to be non-deterministic, so it's difficult, but not impossible.
Oh no,
and there's all sorts of other layers with like emulator and accuracy.
That's kind of interesting. Do you mind? Yeah, explain a little more. That's interesting.
Yeah, so like in order to make a task play back on a console, the emulator needs to be at least accurate enough that it sends the input at the time that the game is expecting it, whether it's expecting it at a specific like frame or a specific clock cycle. It depends on the console how specific it needs to be. Like the Game Boy needs to be specific to the clock cycle. The NES needs to be more specific towards like the frame level. And to that end, like your emulator needs to be that level of accurate and perfect at that. So like if it's even like one frame off in some weird obscure place, if it's halfway in the middle of your task no longer plays back on console. And it's like if it doesn't work there, there's no fixing it in a lot of cases, because you can't just add a frame, right? Because if the emulator's off in the RNG, then it's going to cascade to all the other frames. And all of those RNG calls are going to be completely different.
So this is interesting. So has the device itself then evolved or changed over time to better accommodate some of the things you're mentioning, or has it stayed the same? Like, I'm curious what the evolutionary process has looked like for a replay device.
That is more of an issue of making sure that the emulation side is good, so that the inputs can be sent to the replay device in a way that they'll then work. But there is also layer with like the disk-based systems where, yes, there is hardware extra needed and being added and built for handling that sort of non-deterministic behavior caused by being a disk load.
Curious, Ona, are you back with us? I think you are.
I'll give an example if you want. Yeah. If I'm here and stable. Okay. Just for example, one thing that Dwango, when he was giving a wonderful explanation earlier about how a replay device is pretty much no more than a player piano of a controller. Once you get to something like a GameCube, there's something else that the GameCube controller does other than send button inputs. It also receives a rumble signal. So what we taught, as I taught the device how to communicate in GameCube's controller protocol, we also taught it to know when the controller is rumbling. Now, certain load screens may take a variable amount of time due to variable disk reads, but what if, say, in certain scenes, the controller rumbled when it was done loading? This could be a really clever way to get around variable loading time. It's tricks like that, as well as audio and video processing, that's being incorporated to give TASBot just a little bit of AI, a little bit of extra signal processing, giving it eyes, ears, and I guess touch sensor for the vibrations. Not literally, it's just reading the electronic signal, but that is allowing us to overcome some of the non-deterministic difficulties of disk-based replay.
It's super interesting. And so I'm curious if, let's say I was a person who had finished a tool-assisted speedrun on some game, and I wanted to try it out on my own console, and I take your replay device. What else do I need to be up and going? Like, do I need some sort of technical knowledge of something? Like, how quickly can I get this thing going, on an actual console?
Sure. It's definitely not designed for non-technical users at the moment, but over time we're going to make it more accessible, and we're going to be able to. We can certainly help users walk it through. But this device, which again is sort of the latest one available, it basically just takes a micro USB cable, which is, if you have an Android device, you're all set. So you plug that into the computer, or actually, there's a newer version that even runs apart from the computer. Hopefully, we'll have time to get to that. But basically, the run that was made in the emulator usually has to be dumped or converted into a form that's readable by the replay device. That's important because although the replay device could read it in the proprietary format, it does not know when lag frames would occur or not. Part of the dumping process of dumping the run from the emulator into a special format is we get that extra information of when lag frames are. That helps it sync on an actual console. So you need the correct file, you need the correct device, and a micro USB cable. And the last thing you need is something to plug into this. So I think Dwango might have shown them earlier, but basically it's a cable with a RJ45 standard Ethernet on one end, and on the other end is whatever console we're outputting to.
And we have constant difficulty sourcing those cables, don't we?
Constantly.
Yes, we do, which is why I started making them recently. Definitely not my specialty. If anyone likes making cables, please reach out to us.
I'm guessing they're just...
But,
it's a good time to say this is a cottage industry. We're not mass producing anything. We're not out to make a profit. We're just a bunch of people messing around and trying to do things one at a time, couple at a time. So yeah, if anyone knows how to make cables properly, please come. Discord.task.bot. We would love your assistance.
Don't get me wrong. We can, we could order them in mass. The problem is, well, we do this for charity. I mean, like, for example, for my product, I make little bits of profit, but let's say, a couple $100 for a couple 100 hours of work. It's not exactly making a living. It's more just allowing me to reinvest in more equipment, like that 3D printer that you see over here. Was reinvested from proceeds, which allows me to now print cases for the devices. But yeah, so, in bulk using a house, like a fabrication house or injection molding factory, sure. But then that is a lot of money to make like maybe 20 cables that the community needs. So they're mostly made by hand.
I do have to mention at this point that there are a lot of community projects like that within speedrunning and our retro community. And I remember picking up an input device made by Pidge01, an input display. And, there's tape and we're doing the individual work to make this happen. We're the people who are splicing these things together and making it possible to happen. So definitely understand.
Yeah, I'm encouraging Onosaurus to figure out a way to make the TAS TM32 work as an input display. I think there's a market there.
And I feel like I must say, I don't know when I got cut off earlier regarding the Smash 64 community, but Pidge also comes from Smash 64.
Let's do this. Why don't we go ahead and we're going to take a look right now at SGDQ 2018. And this is Super Metroid 0%. And I guess let's first start by what exactly is, I'll probably throw this to Dwango or maybe Onosaurus, whoever knows, what exactly is Super Metroid 0%?
Onosaurus, you want to take that one?
Sure. Super Metroid 0% is basically beating the game without getting any of the items, essentially. I believe in Super Metroid, every time you get an item, it's 1%, and there are 100 collectible items. So it's essentially beating the game with none of those. That's the idea behind it.
What makes this an interesting, or what made the TASBot team take this on as a presentation for a GDQ? Dwango, I might throw that one over to you.
Oh dear. Yeah, Dwango, yeah, I'll give that one to you, why the team took it on.
Of course, you're picking me right as my my upstream got harshed, so I might be a little buffery, but why did we take specifically Super Metroid on is the question? Well, because it was such a challenge. I mentioned earlier that there are those 2 separate clocks on the SNES, and Super Metroid in particular is notoriously difficult to work with. We didn't know if we would ever be able to verify
If I can jump in here a second.
Please.
So, again, I don't know if I introduced myself at the beginning of this segment, but I'm TyKevin83. I've been working with the TASBot team about since this event. So this SGDQ 2018 event was the first event that I met the team in person at GDQ, and when I went in to meet them, this is what they were working on. I got in the private practice room I think we were in at the time, and they had a stack of SNESs that they had borrowed from the was it Power 9 gaming, World 9 Gaming? Yeah. From World 9
World
and
9
the
gaming,
stage. They just gotten every SNES they could get their hands on, and they would plug one in, run the current work in progress of the run that they had, and see if it synced. And they were just doing that repeatedly, swapping them. Maybe do like 2 or 3 runs on a console, swap it, do 2, 3 runs just for like reliability testing. And I remember just like one of the first things I was introduced to with this scene was that every time it played back, you got a different number for how much time Samus had to leave the stage. And it was so difficult to get it to sync.
In 2014, they found a game-end glitch.
So I'll hop in here and explain some of the mechanics behind why it's so difficult. One of the things that's interesting about Super Metroid is there are those door transitions. Like when we just moved from the previous room into here, that door transition both loads video graphics and sends audio samples from the main CPU to the sound, the APU, the audio processing unit, at the same time. And even one cycle off suddenly cascades into it being a different number of frames. So the only way we could get this section that you're watching here to work is to cheat. This is terribly slow. Right here, Samus is waiting an extreme amount of time and deliberately jumping over any possible area that might cause damage. Like right there, we took a little bit of damage, but it didn't matter because we held to the left for more frames. And then from here, it was a little bit more deterministic. But we ended up with 4440. In testing, we had everything from like .37, .73, or some, or that, well, I can't remember how it was.
And you could see
like
as the consoles got warmed up,
it was wild.
They would kind of level off towards a certain number, but then like it still wasn't perfectly consistent.
Yeah.
It's terribly inconsistent, in fact. One of the things about it is that these are 25-year-old consoles with a ceramic oscillator that changes its speed based on temperature and all kinds of other characteristics like that. So it's definitely a problem that this equipment is getting older, and even when it was brand new, didn't necessarily operate the way that the game developers were told it would.
And additionally, in addition to sort of option selecting movement, which, you know, during that escape sequence, it was sort of paused. That way, if a steam vent appeared here, you wouldn't collide with it. In addition to that, I believe we also started like RTA runners on a save file that gets past the initial cutscene, because that was also the source of a lot of deseg. And as you can see right now, once we get into the run properly, it's, you know, usual TASBot shenanigans, frame perfect and pixel perfect positioning to glitch through walls, do certain transitions, and there's going to be 1 or 2 more major glitches coming right up.
Now, did you try, would it matter if, do we run into the same problems if, let's say, we were using a Super Famicom or we were using one of the revisions of the Super Nintendo? Is the same issues still persist through all those different versions? Nice little jig. TyKevin, do you remember if any of that's accurate?
I'm not sure.
The junior,
I can take parts of this. There are some differences between what's called a 1-chip and a 2-chip Super Nintendo, but none that actually seem to make a huge difference for most things. In other words, there's not like, oh, we can't verify this game because of this other hardware revision. It's not like I have to go get a different Super Nintendo. What does change is the reliability of certain components. That oscillator in particular is one of the most notorious. So definitely some aspects of that, RAM clearing speeds,
so
things
during
like
this
that.
period of time, I want to take a moment to thank Snick and Total. Snick was the one who originally created this run. Snick and a few others, and Total started with his run as a base. Snick's run will sort of jump to credits from this, completing the game in the fastest possible time. And what Total did is he took that, and instead of doing the jump to credits, he replaced it with a multi-stage loader, as we often do. That's sort of how the SNES SMB3 audio payload worked. You're able to get it to run a little bit of code, which gives you a little more control, sort of like a level 2 loader, which you do to give you more control that then lets you really have total control of the system. So a lot of that work was done by Total. And there were a lot of, there was so much experimenting that went into this, and even a lot of parts of this that you don't see. So I'm gonna be quiet a minute if you want to see what's going on. At this point, we have total control of the console, where this text is not actually in the game, but being able to do it in the correct font and everything is excellent. There are so many Easter eggs in this. A couple of them you'll see in a little bit. One Easter egg that Total told me about that I wasn't aware of, that when the cart that you run this payload on actually takes a save file and makes it a permanent ace in that save file. That save file will show a different message depending on which payload you used to generate that save file. And he sort of did that as just a fun add-on. It's something that no one would see unless they actually ran it on their cart. And there's a lot of other aspects of this payload that you'll see. Alluding to the tile count, this was the year that, who was it who was doing the every tile run this year?
I don't remember. I'm drawing a blank.
I don't know who did that.
But I remember I seeing that one.
I know his name. It's just escaping me at the moment. But one of the more prominent, I'm sure someone in chat will be able to correct me, but one of the more well-known Super Metroid speedrunners was doing an all-tiles run. And so if you look at the 295 you're seeing, the joke, there was a continuous joke that was like, you might miss a tile because there's actually this number. And someone would say, well, no, there's actually this number. So it jumps from 200 something to 7,000 something. And it just keeps going all over the place. And there's all these, it was Oats and Goats, I think.
Okay.
And there's all these lovely Easter eggs. It's great.
It's quite an impressive task just by itself. And I'm wondering, once again, as always, I always wonder how long these things took. I'm sure it took months to properly get all these inputs correct and everything like that.
So I asked, I was able to talk to Total yesterday. What he said is that the payload itself actually took only about a week or two to develop, keeping in mind that he already had to the point where there was some arbitrary code execution.
Right.
So that took him a couple weeks, but he actually made 2 payloads. One where Samus kills the animals, and one where Samus doesn't kill the animals, because there was a donation incentive for that.
Yeah, that's a thing that comes up a lot with our donation incentives whenever we do TASBot incentives, is like, how do you do an incentive even when it's a task and you can't really modify the middle of the run effectively? So how we handle that in the past is we've either had incentives to either show or not show a task, or also if there's this save where they kill the animals, we'll prepare both versions of the output separately so that regardless of what input is eventually chosen for the final incentive, we have that version pre-prepped.
Interesting. Okay, so it's one of those things where you could go either way. You just have to make that decision. But I guess assume as you're walking on stage or once you've set up
Yeah.
is complete.
It's like a magic sleight of hand forcing effect, except that
Got it.
we don't need to force the card. We just have it. Whatever card they pick, we can pull out the right one.
You know, you've mentioned this a couple times already throughout the entire episode we've been doing this, and that is this idea of arbitrary code execution, where you take over a game and you reprogram it. I'm curious about the process, as we have a minute here while this whole thing is working. Is arbitrary code execution, is it a trial and error thing, or is there once you take control of a game, you have an idea? Like, I'm curious the process actually reprogramming things to do things like this, where we're using text, we're using the same font as Metroid. I mean, it's a really impressive demonstration what you just showed. How does that process work?
Yeah, so there's like 2 layers to it, and I'm sure Ona will have his own input too on this. But just from my perspective, there's a layer where you're able to do things very, very efficiently if you use the assets of the game, because you can just pull things out of the ROM. But there's also the layer of once you have arbitrary code execution is way more powerful than just being able to pull things out of the ROM. Arbitrary code execution is execute any code. So what we often do is with these things like playing video playback, we get the game to that point where you can do anything, and then we program a bootstrap. So the bootstrap, all it does is it's a really, really tiny snippet of code that says, do this with the inputs. And then we can do that to do things like write text. Like if you wanted to scroll text, we can just say, grab the input, turn it into the font that's on the ROM, send it on the screen. And then that little bootstrap program, if we want it to do code though, we can just say, take the input and interpret it as code.
Well, wait a minute. Samus is a girl?
The classic.
Yes.
Darn right she is. It's really pretty cool. And the reason I'm leaving this on screen is, as you all did during the run, you prove it's the time and the 0%. It's one of the great parts about Super Metroid. You always got to hang to the end because there's in-game timing and all that. There it is, 0%.
Yay, we did it. To answer about how we develop towards that, it's usually very purposeful. Like, let's say you're going for a credits warp. Let's say there is a function in the game. Sorry, for those of you who aren't programmers, a function is just like a bit of code that does something. So let's say there's a function that is play end credits, and that might have a memory address, which is 4 bytes, and then there might be a jump instruction, which is 1 byte. So sometimes all that enemy manipulation to credits warp is just to do 5 bytes of code. It's a lot of work to do a little bit, and that's why, like Kevin said, with different layers and bootstrappers and all that different levels of control, eventually, if it's all that work to do 5 bytes of code, how in the world do we stream video data? And, that's why we need these different levels. Because when we have full control, we're saying, hey, instead of pulling the controller 60 times a second, why don't you pull the controller 281 times a second? And etc. And once we have that level of control, then we can feed said data at that faster rate. And So.
Thank you for explaining that, Ona. You just made it clearer in my mind how you're able to send, as you mentioned, these huge payloads.
See, imagine stage 1 being like, it's not always this way, but imagine a stage being, this will allow us to send whatever data we want. Maybe originally you can only go off of shell positions in Super Mario Brothers 3, and so that's limited to certain X coordinates, let's say. So one stage will let you send whatever data you want, and then another stage might let you send it more rapidly. And then a final stage might be, we're not even going through the game loop code, we're going in a super tight loop possible to just read the controller, put it in memory, read the controller, put it in memory, read the controller, put it in memory, and then finally jump to the part where all that code is in memory to execute it. Something like that.
Awesome. Before we move on to the next run, I'd be remiss if I asked, Dwango, you mentioned there might be some sort of development or some sort of future for this. And I'm wondering if you could perhaps provide some insight there.
Some future for what specific thing?
Didn't you mention? Go ahead. Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Why don't I start off in case you missed due to internet traffic, and you can definitely pick up. But in terms of the future of Super Metroid, not specific to the 0%, but I must note that a person in our community, TPW Rules, is making a replay device known as Tasha, TASBot. HA. And what Tasha does is Tasha actually controls for the slight adjustments in the APU clock frequency that Dwango spoke about earlier. Basically, not only does the button outputs, but it controls via slight adjustments to the clock frequency in order to make events happen when you'd expect them to happen based on the emulator. And this is, you know, the APU will run differently because of temperature, age, for all we know, the phase of the moon. And it really just makes a real console match the idealized version of the emulator. The one thing that goes against something that Dwango mentioned earlier, in that, hey, all we do is talk through the controller port. We've been doing that for as long as possible, but when the console itself is non-deterministic, we're looking through other ways to minimally modify the console. So even though we're slightly modifying what that crystal is doing as our clock, it's almost like trying to restore the SNES the way it is in the design spec. So,
Yep. So
Very
that goes to, I think we
So-
talked about it last stream too, but we'll take only the most minimal steps necessary to get something syncing. And on the SNES, it turns out that one of those minimal steps is modifying the clock source for the APU.
So this is nearly impossible to show, but this whole mess that you see here, this whole mess is Tasha in breadboard breakout form. So there's an FPGA here. There's a tiny little development breadboard. One of these connectors on here, it goes to our existing cable types. We have those RJ45 connectors on there. And this is a SLE logic analyzer. Between all of this, what we're able to do is connect this end into a console through the cables we showed you earlier. So I can connect into, say, the Super Nintendo in particular. And then connect this to a PC that's sending in the information to the FPGA. And then using this breadboard, it uses some voltage dividers and some other crazy things to knock the 5 volts of the console down to a voltage that the FPGA can handle. Last but not least, the SLE is there to act as a logic analyzer to monitor the signal and watch what's happening as we're testing. Effectively, the thing that's different about that device is it also connects to the clock on the console. So let me actually bust this out one more time. One of the things we're able to do is connect directly to the SD to SNES, also known as the FX Pack Pro. And that allows us to do one other extra bit of processing. With this console open, I have the APU oscillator I mentioned earlier. We can connect a probe to monitor this. We're not actually modifying the console in any way. We're just monitoring that signal, that clock signal that goes to the APU. It's not exposed on an external chip. Now, this is where we start getting into some really dicey territory. But before I get too far off into the weeds, I'll just pause and say, this is necessary because there's literally no other way to do it. If there was an easier way to do it, trust me, we would have done it by now. But in addition to monitoring this device, this ceramic oscillator, we can also gently bias it. We can gently push it in the right direction. We're not changing it. We're just saying, hey, run a little faster, run a little slower, push forward, pull back a little bit, because we're trying to get this clock to synchronize with the main clock that's underneath this shield. And that's the only way to get to the point of deterministic behavior that we might be able to pull off something like a full run of Super Metroid. And he's making really, really good progress on that, but it's by no means
one
a
other
done deal.
thing that we should mention is this is mostly applicable to Donkey Kong Country 2 so far, but it may apply to others. Dwango mentioned that we might mention it later. Basically, each segment is the console latching the controller, saying, give me your inputs, give me your inputs. I think Dwango explained what latching was in a previous segment. And then when the stage loads, there's a little bit of lag where the console does not pull. So what my replay device does, and actually this was implemented in Total's PSOC 5 as well, is it's actually seeing when a load screen is by saying, the console took longer than the 60th of a second to ask for its data. And by that, we can determine when loads happen, if the loads are extra long, extra short. We call that latch trains. This was an idea came up with Ilari came up with this, and I implemented it in code. And this seems to really help with sync, especially in Donkey Kong Country 2. We almost have it 100% where we started at like 10% sync. And it's exciting to see if we're going to be able to get it to 100%. And if any of this in combination with Tasha will eventually allow a game like Super Metroid, or dare I say, Ilari's favorite, Speedy Gonzales, to ever sync.
Well, I appreciate you highlighting these things because it actually, yes, it provides insight on how these things work and how you do what you do, but also how these consoles were designed and how they were able to get some of these games to work the way they obviously had to make some, I don't want to say compromises, but there were some things just inherent to the architecture that for games to run properly the way Nintendo intended or wanted to. So it's quite fascinating and interesting. And in the interest of time, I'm going to move us ahead here. I think it's time to talk, because this is almost like a right turn, somewhat quite different here. This is going to be AGDQ 2019 Super Scribblenauts. And I'm going to be using, thank you, Duango, by the way. I'm using the video that your editor was able to repurpose so we could see some of the chat as this is happening on screen. Where do we start with this? I guess, what exactly is Scribblenauts and what makes it a good TASBot presentation?
It allows for some of that dynamism that we were talking about. It's so difficult to get into the TASBot streams with it, we having pre-programmed input most of the time.
Yeah, so I'll hop in and say there's definitely I might still be having some bandwidth challenges, but so I can say that a lot of it is man, this run is insane to watch.
So
by the way, chat was really actively involved in this process because what they were typing was being used to vote on various different things. We had all this voting around stuff. I mentioned earlier that we regressed a little bit, that we had had some issues with failing to get everything done ahead of time. This was definitely a run that we ran to the last minute. We were still tweaking things before we got up on stage.
Yeah.
So,
well, the thing is that we had like the basic idea of we can play Scribblenauts kind of done during like the run up to the event, but the idea of like taking custom user input and inputting that into the game, I think was extremely last minute.
And as well, how do you stress test for something like this?
Oh, I can get in. I want to tell a whole story about
this.
Please.
I didn't think you'd have an answer. Go for it.
Because I was there the whole week, and this is okay. So I got to start at the beginning. So the beginning of this is I was planning to drive to. This was AGDQ 2019, right? Yep. So right. AGDQ. So that's in National Harbor, Maryland. Oh no, that's right. That was the first step as we went to MagFest in National Harbor, Maryland. But I was planning to drive there and then go down just a little ways to Rockville, Virginia. Was that what it was? What was the name of that little? Yes, some little town in Virginia. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I was planning that drive, and I was talking with people in the TASBot Discord. Is anybody else on this route that I could like stop by and pick people up instead of having people need to fly everywhere? Obviously, like thinking about that now, it's like funny because you would never do that now with the whole COVID thing, like stopping in random places. But like at the time, it was totally logical. Just like, hey, this person's in Ohio, this person's here in Pennsylvania. I could pick people up on this whole like series of stops. Anyway, what ended up working out is the guy who was making this Mashbot device. His name's Funkmaster, and he'd been working on it for I want to say 6 months to a year, some long period of time. And he'd gotten this thing working to tap the DS screen manually instead of worrying about like physically modifying the device like we're doing with Brain Age. So that's what we had set up to submit for AGDQ 2019 and what had gotten accepted. Now, so we needed to get his device and him to Maryland and then to Virginia, and he was in Canada, like near Toronto, and I'm in Michigan, and he doesn't drive. The Funkmaster doesn't drive. So what we did was I ended up making a stop in Toronto on my way down to Maryland, and I did not. Oh, Rockville's in Maryland too. Okay, so this is mostly in Maryland. Anyway, like I did not know when I was looking at the Google Maps how bad of an idea this drive is. It looks totally sane because it's just like you go straight east from Michigan to Toronto, and then you go straight south from Toronto to Maryland. That's fine, right? No, there are no highways north-south through New York and Pennsylvania. So the whole way I'm driving south from Toronto is just like back road through a city to back road through a city to back road through a city, like up and down the Appalachia like trail. It was awful drive. So by the time I finally get Funkmaster to Rockville and National Harbor, Maryland, I had the worst migraine. Just like I get migraines occasionally. I was in terrible shape. I remember being like absolutely relieved to see Dwango in the MagFest event and just crashing and like almost.
He was definitely done.
And then I remember I mentioned Funkmaster doesn't drive, so I'm getting this migraine coming on as we're leaving to get back to the hotel where we have the room for like the whole TASBot team. And it's like nobody on the TASBot team drives. I'm getting this terrible migraine. I don't feel comfortable driving anymore. Turns out P4 plus 2 does drive. He actually is a licensed driver. So we were able to get P4 to drive me and my car and the rest of the guys back to the hotel. And that's how we got MashBot to GDQ.
I'm glad it made it because what we're looking at is just pretty wild. I guess first, what exactly is MashBot? Because you can see it on screen here. Just a second when I start up the video again here. What exactly is MashBot?
Yeah, Funkmaster is the guy in the light blue shirt or vest, sweatshirt thing. I don't know. I can't talk. Sorry. And he made MashBot. MashBot is... So like I said, Brain Age was, we hooked it directly into the pad where you touch the stylus to send inputs to the DS. Instead of doing that, instead of like hijacking the actual like board, we had a stylus connected to a bunch of servos. And it would move the stylus around the screen, go down tap, move the stylus around the screen, go down tap, and just repeatedly do that. And so like it's all a manual. Like imagine it for the NES or SNES, like when we do Super Mario Bros. If that like whole TASBot holding a controller thing, if he had like actual fingers and was pressing the buttons instead of just they're being done through wires.
You know.
So
yeah.
You go ahead, Latman.
No, I was curious because the inputs have to be pixel perfect or pretty precise, right? They have to be pretty exact for this to work properly, I'm assuming.
So all I was going to say is you would imagine how important calibration and being on a level surface are for something like this. Oh. And you might imagine how, say, moving it from one place to another could cause potential issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had to carry it on stage.
Yeah.
We had one particular servo that it was being worn down and was literally changing its behavior. So we would calibrate, and then the process of calibration, it would change.
Yes,
do you remember that?
So there's a couple more layers to this story, right? So like I was saying, we went to National Harbor for MagFest and then went down to GDQ. At National Harbor, Maryland, we did a signing event where MashBot signed TASBot's signature using a pen instead of the DS stylus. And at this TASBot signing event, we started to realize how difficult this process was because the pressure necessary to get like a pen signing something would wear the servos to a point that they were no longer able to do the precision necessary to do the signing. And so it was like this repeated process of like put a pen in, stop working, take it out, tune some stuff, put another pen in, stops working. Okay, so we went back to the hotel right after I was like all slept off the migraine, right? And then we went to a micro center and bought a bunch more servo components so that we could like rebuild MashBot to be more reliable during the event.
So you're rebuilding it,
It
as
was
this
hectic.
is actually happening.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Dwayne, go ahead if there was something you wanted to add to that.
Oh, just that this was the exact scenario we didn't want to find ourselves in, and specifically the kind of thing. GDQ selection committee, I am really sorry for that mess. Anytime you try to do anything with a physical device, if it's mechanical, it will break. I often call spinning hard drives rusty metal, rusty spinning discs. Old hard drives are mechanical. It's not a matter of if they will fail. It is absolutely a matter of when they will fail. And we faced a fair bit of this with these servos. If it's mechanical and moving, it will wear out. It's really difficult to get consistency. Amazingly, everything worked perfectly. We didn't have a single major issue in this. The voting rounds caused Twitch to lag, and we were consuming massive quantities of worldwide Twitch traffic, but
And
It's one of the things I remember the most from watching this live was that, first of all, Twitch chat moves fast during a GDQ to begin with. The speed at which it increased during this, immediately watching this and chat, we all picked up on this so quickly what was happening. The way that you all set this up and the way that you prepped us, everyone's subbing, everyone wants to get in and to press buttons and to do something, to see TASBot do something that we actually made happen. Whose idea was it to poll the audience and like how does that actually taking place? What are the kind of logistics behind it?
team effort. By this point, we'd started doing our planning. Instead of doing it on the TASBot Freenode IRC channel, we started doing it in the TASBot Discord server. And it was just a whole bunch of people a lot more openly talking about our ideas. I made it a very big point to not do things in secret. And my attitude is, hey, if you're dedicated enough to be involved in the TASBot community, to be on our server and be there where we're actively working on things, it's okay to talk about it openly there. It's a safe place. We're going to get maybe a couple hundred people, maybe 1,000 people, maybe even 10,000 people if we're really lucky, see this thing while we're working on it. We're going to see 100,000 people or 200,000 people that watch it live on Twitch, another couple 100,000 people on YouTube, depending on the content. You know what? Let's just not worry about that 1% that might see our plans early. It's not been a problem where suddenly someone's come and blabbed about it and ruined the surprise for everyone. So a lot more team activity happened on this, a lot more players. In fact, it's such a large list that I don't even have a good idea of who all was involved at this point.
I'd like to add one thing, if I may, and that's that,
Please.
you know, a lot of what we discuss is we don't want to repeat content too much, but we also want to learn what went over very well and what may not have gone over so well. Our most well-received showings, not all, but many of them involve audience participation or interaction of some kind. Whether it was, you know, I mean, think about some of the presentations you chose to review for this presentation. Twitch plays, TASBot plays Twitch, or Twitch plays TASBot. I always mix up the direction.
Pokemon
plays Twitch.
Pokemon
Thank
plays,
you.
exactly.
And you know, the Skype is basically, hey, look, this is real people. We're interacting with the audience. Look, it's the audience. So same thing with this. So, you know, we like doing things that involve the audience. However, it's a balance of making sure we don't do it too frequently and making sure we try and do it in a new, innovative way each time. So this was a pretty different way.
This was definitely innovative. Now, there were issues, and I need to be honest about that. We did not get a chance with tech to do things like verify that those voting instructions were clear on screen. So if you couldn't hear what we were saying, you couldn't necessarily see what the results were in those pie charts.
Right.
They were too small. The font size was just things that we didn't get a chance to test fully because we were so focused on just trying to make this box do the right thing.
And it's
By the way, this run has a lot of deadlines in it because the original tasks of this game, which you should go to taskvideos.org and watch, it's one of the most entertaining runs that's there. The original TAS had a lot of dead lions for various reasons.
Yeah, like it turns out that dead lions are extremely useful in Scribblenauts.
Save the
It
animals.
sounds like there's more there, but I obviously, I mean, all of the inputs are deliberate, so you needed to do that in order to make something else happen. I assume, right?
And that's also the joke. If you look on screen right now, you see what your 4 choices are for this.
Yeah, the reason we had only 4 choices and they're all the same is because we could not get the other options to synchronize. We had to remove audience choice because it would have desynchronized or been very risky. We would have likely picked something that would have broken otherwise. We're very fortunate that this run worked. Like, not kidding.
This is actually
Very lucky that it worked.
I've heard this asked a few times, and it's coming up in the chat right now on Twitch right now. Were there like Twitch payments systems that got crashed, or like AWS was
Amazon
like, just
Prime,
like hamper?
Twitch Prime.
So in case it's not obvious by watching this video, it's very bursty. You'll see it pause entirely and then whoosh, and then pause entirely. That was because Twitch was utterly and completely overwhelmed. Their servers could not keep up. And we also discovered that their timestamps had a problem. We've tried figuring out ways of trying to report this to Twitch, but effectively, GDQ had been running for 48 hours. And by that point, their timestamps had drifted so far that it was multiple minutes off. So, yeah, we uncovered several stress tests by doing this. We pushed their hardware, or not their hardware, but their software stack for their chat way harder than anything else.
It's just a classic thing at any TASBot event. We have to find some way of stress testing Twitch in a different way.
And that's I guess going back to sort of my first question going into this is how do you stress test for that? And the answer I was looking for is you can't. You can stress it as much as you can, but you cannot, I mean, in absence of bots and other things which may or may not be allowed, you cannot simulate 200,000 live audience members or 100,000 plus live audience members with subscriptions and this and that. It's just, it's really difficult to simulate.
Yeah, the thing that I think we were most worried about by the end of it was we talked a bit about like the surface being level being really important for like the machine knowing how far down to go to press the stylus on the screen, but the force of the like servos was so strong that it was actually etching the screen slightly with some of the presses. And so by the time we were done with the whole MashBot segment, we were having issues with reliability just because of like the leveling of the screen being broken by the MashBot.
We had literally worn down
and worn off bits of the stylus. It was great.
Is there a guess, or perhaps it's known how many inputs were actually needed? Like how many times did did MashBot touch the screen?
A lot. Over the course of the entire project, you're seeing just one run through of the entire sequence. But over the entire development cycle, a lot.
Yeah, probably like tens of thousands is the order of magnitude, I would think.
Yeah.
And what else was I thinking? Something else.
I'm curious, was there any additional hardware needed besides the DS and MashBot? Was there anything else that needed to make this thing work?
That's exactly what I was thinking about. Okay. So in order for this to be working, you also have to be seeing a DS's screen. How do you do that? The DS doesn't have video output. Okay, well now a lot of people know that like the original DS has mods available for it to do video output. And as speedrunners, we don't find any problem with those because they don't change like the timing or consistency of any of the internal behavior of the console. So during the event, again, during the week of the event, hadn't prepped this beforehand, Funkmaster did his own DS video hard mod with a kit he had ordered. So like that happening in the GDQ practice rooms was also necessary for you guys to be able to see the video output that you see in the final task.
Yes, so many things. So much work went into this. This was definitely one where we had regressed because we were doing all these things at the last minute. Some of it because you kind of have to do some of these things in person. I don't know of any other way we really could have easily done this one, but
Well, Dwayne, I think that's totally fair because there are actually, many of the co-op runs you see at GDQ are basically only practiced in the practice rooms at GDQ because none of us, we don't, especially nowadays with COVID, but this is like our one chance a year or twice a year we get a chance to all hang out with each other. And so, co-op runs just aren't necessarily possible. So the fact that you put this all together when you actually see each other makes a lot of sense. I mean, you had to drive to Canada, Ty Kevin, just to make this thing happen. So.
I had to get a passport. I didn't have a passport until then. I had to get one just to be able to go to Canada. Oh, and it was so funny. This is like back around I won't get too deep into this because it could get political, and I don't want to get political. But I was having to cross the Canadian border, and Funkmaster's name sounds very Russian, and I was debating whether it would be better to say that I was crossing the border to pick up Funkmaster or to pick up Ivan.
Oh man.
Man.
Yes. As we're getting closer towards the end of this run, is this the initial idea for this? Did Funkmaster bring his device to y'all, or was this something that you sought out? Man, can we do this on a DS? I'm curious if how that worked, that interaction.
It was just an idea that was pitched. He got involved. He said, "Oh, I'd like to do this." He had EE experience. Had an EE background. He was streaming remotely and doing this kind of stuff. Yeah, it was a kind of an iterative process getting to this point.
Somebody in the chat mentioned that if they can remember properly, it even seemed like it hit the servers for like another day before all this was straightened out. Because I'm not sure I'm sure they had, but it didn't seem like Twitch had this kind of traffic on their chat servers before because it just got hit so hard.
We might have done things even worse than this at one point. RTM PBN is a project.
No.
So I have since apologized, and we have not done it since. But we legitimately put video through Twitch chat, through Unicode encoding it and shoving it through a channel. It was bad. Anyway, I am still dealing with bad network connectivity, but. So we did have Pokemon Plays Twitch that did break Twitch harder in one sense. That was early on before their infrastructure was well developed. This one was a larger volume just because there were simply more people actively doing it all at once. There were so many messages in a very short period of time. And that's because we had voting rounds. So with both Pokemon Plays Twitch, yes, there was a huge amount of overall chat traffic, but we had individual bursts because we were asking Twitch chat to type at the exact same time. That definitely threw it over. The next thing we did where we were sending messages with Unicode at max length from multiple accounts at once and then reading them from a IRC client and reconstructing it as an image, that one resulted in us, I believe we were consuming 7.6% of all global Twitch chat traffic in one room. one.
Oh, that is so cool.
We stopped immediately. I had a chat with a couple of people on staff with Twitch, and I promised to not do that again. And they said, "Okay, the tech team wanted me to talk to you about that."
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That is so wild. TASBot bringing Twitch down to its knees.
Yeah,
That's so wonderful.
you didn't know how close we were to robot overlords taking over, but
Right.
we've been
It
pretty
sounds like
close.
it's about to happen.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
that is so great.
I did want to mention that
Please.
there was a lot of that improvisation and build up at the event, but we did also have the security that Funkmaster had verified everything working on his system before we left, and there was also the issue of if everything didn't work out with hacking in the video signal capture, you could always just take a camera to the whole rig and just get video that way. A little camera towards the DS screen. So there's a lot of different ways and backups that we have to handle things.
In the effort of transparency, I would say that from my perspective, what Dwango says is mostly true. We're so much better at not doing things last minute. But from my perspective, I would say, yeah, we always have it working before we submit it, but it is still common to do little optimizations, little tweaks before then. So for example, going
Yeah.
from just a camera to directly capturing the video output, those types of things still tend to happen last minute. Or say, I
Yeah.
don't know, the day before, turning the visualization boards into something that can work on the Nintendo 64 analog stick. These little optimizations tend to happen.
Yeah. We always want to make sure we have a very thorough run that is high enough quality that we could show it before we go into submissions. Oftentimes, though, we will do small improvements, and that happened with Freedom Planet. The run that was submitted was actually slower than what we ended up showing because in the intervening weeks, just like people who were grinding their times leading up to an event, shaving off a couple of minutes, we were able to do the same thing, or the Freedom Planet guys were. We usually do try to just do that extra bit of improvement, but we always want to make sure that we're starting with this is our fallback that will absolutely positively work, and it's definitely tested. And if we fail to get this improvement to work for any reason, we can always fall back to that. So yeah, we do some of those improvements. And again, it's because when you're there in person at an event, sometimes you can do things you just weren't able to do remotely.
And this was another event where there was a great takeaway with, I think it was this event where there was other things like Castlevania. Was this the one where we had the Castlevania GBA, Dwango?
Yeah, we don't speak of the commentary on that. One of our, that's where we discovered that you really absolutely positively must make the guy go to rehearsal, even if he says, no, I don't need to rehearse.
Yeah. So there were other great takeaways for like preparation from this event in general, where like when we're gonna submit like tasks verification, it's not important just to make sure that the verification is working, but that we've done the research ourselves on what goes into like making a good task of that game, so that we can add a little bit to the commentary and sort of probe the runner or task, like preferably the task author, but if nobody's available, of course, we might go back to like the RTA community or somebody who is at least familiar with the game. And then, yeah, we learned from this event the importance of having that, a little bit of that knowledge ourselves, so we can probe those people and make sure we actually make those connections with the people and have everyone like learn the commentary in advance of the event.
Well, I'm thankful that you all do that, because it does really add to a great performance. And so this was definitely a fun one to watch. I'll tell you what, we're going to take a break. We got 2 more runs, folks. We're running down the home stretch. We're going to take a quick break here, give us all a chance to maybe, reconnect or grab some water while we're at it. But before we go, just a quick heads up that AGDQ 2021 online is now complete. And as of this point, we have raised $2.77 million for now. As a reminder that all of your GDQ's portions of subs, gift subs, Prime Gaming subs, and bits cheered on the GDQ Twitch channel for this entire month of January, which we're on the last day, will be donated to the Prevent Cancer Foundation. For those of you that have subbed during this stream, we really do appreciate it. Thank you for all of your donations. You make this stuff possible. You make all of this wonderful money available to the Prevent Cancer Foundation. Thank you so much. We'll be back in just a few. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Games Done Classic, where we are looking back at legendary GDQ moments with the people that made them happen. Today's episode is all about the history of TASBot presentations at GDQ events, Part 2, and wow, have we hit a ton of them. And just, folks, if you enjoy geeking out on this kind of stuff, you're in the right place, I promise you. We're going to talk just a little bit more about the hardware side of things, because everything you've seen done by TASBot is performed with actual, consoles and hardware and stuff that really is really existing. And Onosaurus had something that he wanted to share, and I'm going to throw it over to him. What have you got for us, Ona?
Sure. Well, just a quick plug, and if you want to be a part of any of the things you're about to hear about, we'd love to have you over at discord.tas.bot. This version of the board, pardon the focus, and the case that I showed earlier are the current version, but we're actually moving forward. I don't believe I've shown this yet. Someone made this. Someone who I didn't know just sent me a message on Discord one day and said, hey, I took your TASTM32 and look what I made. I decided to give it a little screen and call it the TASPod. This was made by Rasteri, and his girlfriend actually did the little artwork on here. Similar idea, except there is an extra USB port for thumb drives. And so instead of loading the run off the computer, for people on the go, like say, I don't know, a marathon presentation, you can just bring it on a little USB stick. You can get some nice feedback, including visualization from the screen, and it can be powered by the console even without disrupting it. So he just contacted me out of nowhere, and now we're partners and we're coding together every day, working on the next version. All of these features are going to be incorporated into the next version of my device. And so this just shows you can come into this community, bring an idea, and if it's a great idea, it will be incorporated into the final product. He's made some other things like this NES controller. Doesn't look so special, right? There is a TASTM32 replay device inside of this.
That is so
you
cool.
should be aware of it. It's super cool, but it could, it could also potentially mask a tool-assisted speedrun. This also works as a completely normal controller. So someone could pause in the beginning to show it's real, give a special button press, and suddenly it starts playing a task. It's important for people to know what's out there, so you can be aware. And the last thing I wanted to show was this is sort of our latest endeavor, working with Blaster Mac, who I saw in chat, Gravitos, who I saw in chat. This is one of those cables that I told you about. It goes from an RJ45 to the Super Nintendo. But what's special about this is this Super Nintendo header is actually made out of the same material as this case. Yes, that's right. This Super Nintendo head came out of that 3D printer back there. And the pins were bought directly, soldered on, heat shrunk. And what I'm trying to say is these cables, we're now trying to completely manufacture them from all resourceable parts rather than cut perfectly good extension cables that could be otherwise used. So there's so much exciting going on in the future of hardware. I just wanted to briefly show you some of these things before we go back to our next exciting Pokemon run.
I do want to mention, Oda, this is one of the great things and awesome things about the task community, the speedrunning community. Quite often, you never know what's going to happen if you just message somebody and say, hey, I've got an idea. Would you all be interested?
I still have, for another time, I still have the original email I sent Dwango in, I think it was 2015, 2016.
Oh, so cool.
Hello, Dwango / Alan. I'm not sure... full punctuation and everything, even though on the internet you don't often do that.
It was very formal.
This is, I am reaching out to you to let you know, blah, 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 I don't think there's a place for me. Meanwhile, within 24 hours, he had responded to me 3 times. He had given me his personal cell phone number. I don't think he does that with everybody. I think he just got the right vibes. But I don't know, there was something that just he got a good feeling, I got a good feeling, and suddenly I was part of the TASBot community. I didn't even expect a response.
So cool. I love hearing stories like that. Let's jump into it. So AGDQ 2020 Pokemon Blue TASBot presentation. Ty, Kevin, I'm going to throw this to you because you're the resident Pokemon expert. Is there anything we need to set up before we dive into this?
There's a whole lot we need to set up, and I can just get started from the very beginning.
Please.
So the reason that this run is Pokemon Blue NSC and not anything else is because this is like the progenitor of everything that we're doing with the Game Boy and Game Boy Color for TASBot. So it all started in early 2018, and it even started before then. But I guess the best part to pick up the story is in early 2018 for the show, I think, because we had gone through the whole RTA transition for the Pokemon speedrunning community. And now we've got people trying to do these perfect speedruns using RNG manipulation. And we've got all the emulators updated so that they can do these speedruns in the emulators just like they're happening on the console. And this is all, we've got this all working, and it was all the work of Pokemon speedrunners programming emulators for our games to be able to work just as they work on the Game Boy player as they do in the emulator. So that all happened, and then in early 2018 still, GIFVEX created this task, And what you see in the event is done as a TASBot presentation. But GIFX's original run was actually not a true TASBot, because what he did was he wrote a version of a Pokemon Blue ROM that changed a couple of things in the way that the inputs are taken. So that instead of taking inputs from the controller ports, they were taking inputs from another place in the ROM, and the ROM was entirely customized to have the entire task as part of the game data on the ROM. So he was
Wow.
able to like flash his tasks to a Game Boy cartridge, plug that Game Boy Pokemon Blue cartridge into a console, and it would play itself with no external tooling whatsoever.
That is absolutely fascinating. So blue
Yes.
was chosen for then a very specific purpose and a reason.
Yes.
So
this had all been done to set up the scene for like the understanding that wow, Game Boy emulation is accurate enough now that we are seeing the same behavior on console that we expected from what we were doing in the emulator.
you know, we recently just had a Pokemon Blue run at AGDQ 2021 online,
Yep.
and you can see right away from the RTA community that a lot of things, the game gets broken 8 ways from Sunday in the RTA scene. That's exactly, which is interesting because going back and watching this run, I had a little bit better understanding of what's going on. But what are we exactly seeing here? What is actually happening? Walk us through this task a little bit.
So what the task does is it sets up your player's like trainer ID. Like every time you get a Pokemon, there's a secret like ID associated with it that labels it as being owned by you. And so like if you do a trade, then the ID gets moved over to the other game, and the traded Pokemon that you get has the ID from the other game. So then the games are able to know that the Pokemon are traded. And the effect of that is it's like another point in that the tasks can you start storing data in the Pokemon like data structure. So then when you pick up your first Pokemon, we also manipulate the DVs. DVs are like random values to determine how good a Pokemon is. Like there's base stats that Pokemon have, but then they can have additional stats. We call them IVs in most generations, but in Gen 1, they're called DVs. And the correlation is effectively like 1 DV is worth 2 IVs in any of the modern gens. But in Gen 1, all we're using these for is just another place to store data that is going to be executed as code in a way that is like surreptitious. Like it's completely transparent to the viewer. We're just playing the game normally, but actually what we're doing is precisely manipulating these like Pokemon data structures to have code in them where you would expect random numbers.
So just so I'm understanding correctly, then is that code that you're storing, those inputs that you're storing in different places of the ROM, is that working in conjunction sequentially at the same time as typical controller inputs, or is it done completely different? Like, I'm curious how that actually works together from, the actual input that's being put into the device as well. The hardware input.
So this task that you see now live at the event has none of that. So I'd have to get into a lot more of like the in between, and I will. Sure. We got to get into more of that later. But the task here is only using like the normal controller input, and it's an official Pokemon Blue ROM.
Got it.
So what happened between GIFX's tasks and now to make that possible was like just after GIFX made his task, I started talking with Dwango. Hey, I would like to do Pokemon Yellow at GDQ, and there was all the discussion around, well, we can submit it, but we needed to be able to play back on console. And at the same time as that, I know you were just talking earlier about retro RGB and that scene. Well, over in the retro RGB scene, there's a guy, Extremes, who is making Game Boy interface to improve the video fidelity of the Game Boy player's output for use with things like the OSSC or the HDMI adapters that are available for the first model GameCubes. And part of his reverse engineering allowed him to also give Game Boy Interface the capability to read inputs back from an SD card instead of from the controller ports. So now we had a way of putting tasks onto the SD card instead of hacking them into the game data of like a ROM. And so then we could do truly unmodified TASBot playback on a Game Boy player console.
As a side comment, just one thing I'm hoping to try eventually is now that my replay device does support giving input through the GameCube port. We haven't tried this yet, but I'm curious if we can do a task on a Game Boy ROM through the controller port, but that still needs investigation.
Yeah, it might be possible. The way that the Game Boy interface system is able to maintain such like precise sync and reliability compared to a lot of other replay devices is that GBI watches the audio data coming straight from the Game Boy player, and audio data is timing based on the Game Boy Advance's CPU clock. And there's only one clock source in the Game Boy player. It's not like the SNES, where there's all sorts of thousands of clocks flying about, and you gotta line them all up and like hack them. No, there's one clock source, and you can actually like see it on the fly from the audio output. So Game Boy interface just says, okay, this audio sample's passed, this audio sample's passed. Oh, enough audio has passed. I know that there's another frame, and I can drop an input. That doesn't actually count it by frames. It has to be more precise than that even. But it'll get too technical if I explain all of that.
It starts getting into clock cycles.
Yeah, it starts to get into clock cycle stuff. There's even been clock cycle wars over Game Boy games now. You know, like people talk about frame wars and tasking. Game Boy tasking has become so optimized that there are not just frame wars, but clock cycle wars.
Subframe wars, yeah. So you'll see timing sometimes where you'll have a real-time run on speedrun.com or something where they're analyzing the video, exactly measuring where it started, where it stopped, getting down to the exact frame of a run. This is even more absurd. This is subframe.
Yeah. It's really ridiculous. But so like with Game Boy interface having been made, so just kind of roll back to the original setup for this. With GIFX's tasks establishing the accuracy of the emulator for the purpose of Pokemon games, and then with Game Boy interface then allowing us to send the inputs without modifying the game's cartridge or like any of the ROM data that would be on a normal Pokemon Blue cartridge. Now we were able to do this, what we showed at the eventual event, where we played GIFX's exact same task that he had originally submitted, and now demonstrate, yes, this is playing back on the Pokemon, on the original Game Boy player hardware. And yeah, the game is very blue. Game Boy interface is very good at representing the colors that the Game Boy Color actually would be emitting for like its light characteristics. It does all sorts of crazy stuff to make the game look like very, very true to its original design intent.
You know, this is for all intents and purposes, Pokemon is one of the most popular game series ever. And I would fail to mention this, but what category is this, and what's specific about that category for this task?
So the importance of this NSC category to Pokemon speedrunning is that there's like 3 layers most of the main like RTA community is familiar with. The fastest one is save corruption, which is a thing because the programmers don't properly like check if your save data is corrupted. So you can turn the console off at a certain point in time, corrupt the save data in a way that isn't noticed by the game, and then restart the game, and suddenly you have a thing called item underflow, which is like kind of like what we talked about earlier. It's like it's one of those layers to getting arbitrary code on a console. And with item underflow, then you can just like swap a couple of things around and say jump to the Hall of Fame. Now, this is not that.
Dringo, were you going to say something? I'm sorry. No, I'm glad you mentioned all of this because it, in essence, you're saying that we had never seen anything like this then at a GDQ. This kind of performance had not been done. It sounds like it might not have even been invented until then, or discovered, I should say, until then.
The strategies for these like save corruption, at least save corruption had been known for an extremely long time. The strategy for no save corruption had been known previously to GDQ, but hadn't been shown at a GDQ. Like this is the first time that this kind of task was shown at a GDQ, excepting if you count like the GDQ X 2018, where we showed some prototypes on Pokemon Yellow. And again, those are like prototypes. It was like really experimental and not very well optimized gameplay. compared to what we have available now to do. And that is
So what
that is something I would like to submit someday, is to submit like the updates of Pokemon Yellow for one of the GDQs to say, hey, look, we did this in 2018 and now it's way better.
This is a really good point. So there's some really great interesting points being made in the chat. And so where are we now in the task? What exactly is happening? Because the character is doing some weird movements. We're seeing some things start to happen. What exactly is going on?
Yeah, so what happens in the no save corruption run, so we're talking about the save corruption where you do that thing, turning off the game to corrupt the save data. This one doesn't do that, so it has to do something else to gain access to like getting to the Hall of Fame. And so what it does is it does a trainer fly, which is where you die to a wild encounter while encountering a trainer battle at the end of Viridian Forest, which warps you back to Pallet Town. Then you walk, or Viridian City, depending on how you do it. This one might do Viridian City. And then you just walk back to the forest. And when you get back there, because you were in the middle of starting a battle, the system that the game has for understanding at what point you are in different trainer battles in the forest and their text, what text it needs to show you before and after the battles, that whole system is just corrupted. It's horribly corrupted. So we keep fighting trainers repeatedly to increment that system past where it's supposed to be, which then reads data from the boxes where you set up those trainer ID and the DVs of the Pokemon, and the rival name also is very important to all this thing, and your player name.
Wasn't the rival name in this just red?
It might have been that the rival name is
in this
red and your player
one.
name is what's important.
Yeah,
to the,
right.
Depends on the specific run.
Yeah, you can see that now. The female sign, colon, the MN in Pokemon. Yeah.
Yeah.
You touched upon it briefly, but I think it's important to mention, what's the future of this? Where do you go from here? Because this seems like it, once again, breaks the game in a new way.
Yeah, there actually has been an optimization to this run found where it's able to jump a little bit later in the Hall of Fame, so you don't get that little sprint where you talk to Oak before it goes to the Hall of Fame screen where it walks through the Pokemon and then shows your end time. So there are new optimizations that the RTA runners are doing, but there's also stuff being done by TASers now, because GIFX and Extremes and all these other people worked on the emulation, Enter Pinter, DeBombstew, Extra Tricky, all these people working from the Pokemon speedrunning community, a little bit myself and casual poke player as well. I think I named everybody now.
That was a lot. No, I'm impressed. I mean, we covered a lot. Is there anything we're missing from the run as the credits are wrapping up here? Because it's so interesting hearing the behind the scenes to this.
Yeah, so the key with all this is that once the Pokemon speedrunning community got it to that point, we were able to then take that and apply the knowledge we had gained to the rest of the Game Boy library. And now we basically have the Game Boy library to the point where you can take any game off the shelf, and if you can TAS it in the latest version of BizHawk, it will sync on console. It's almost guaranteed. There are a couple games that are not, but it's whereas with a lot of systems, it's you pick a game, you don't know whether it's going to sync or not. It's very, very, very likely if you pick a game off the shelf for the Game Boy, it will line up. And all that's possible now just because of the work that the Pokemon speedrunning community did to get this run working, and then to get the rest of the library fixed up from there.
Yeah,
that is
it's
so
a
cool.
trifecta of a really strong emulator combined with a really reliable method of replay, because we're working with this interface that's part of the GameCube, combined with all of the other aspects of having a little bit more information, getting all the way down to clock cycle level, only one processor clock rather than two like on the Super Nintendo. It's just a perfect trifecta of everything coming together to make this extremely reliable. So this is probably, if you want to get into playing games or tool-assisted speedruns on your own hardware, this is probably one of the easiest ways to go at it.
Yeah. And that's how we got now to the point where we have the runs.tas.bot site where we have all of these runs that I've been talking about archived. So if somebody does have Game Boy interface, they can just go to that site, runs.tas.bot, look at the runs page, find a game they have, download the package, and play it back themselves.
And a huge shout out to the Pokemon community as well, because it's helpful to have such a vast and wide community that is contributing to all this. Because as you mentioned, there are things that have been there was collaboration with RTA runner. There was a ton of people that made something that led to the moments that we saw here on stage. at AGD 2020. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I know you mentioned in the notes another question you might ask about this is like if
Yeah.
it was successfully performed before the stream.
Yes.
That is
Yeah.
another thing that is so awesome about the Game Boy playback system is you hit the button and it just goes, and you can just at any time hit the reset switch and it goes again, and it will just keep repeatedly test. I can do 10 tests in a row of a game and it will never desync.
Yeah, we don't
Unless
have
I
to
let
worry
the
about
game-
EMI or ESD. We don't have to worry about electrostatic discharge or electromagnetic interference nearly as much on this kind of a run as you do on anything that you're doing through a Nintendo or Super Nintendo.
Yeah, and the
Wow.
only hardware needed for that whole setup is the Game Boy player, which is the little brick attachment for the bottom of the GameCube, the GameCube itself, and some way to load the Game Boy interface homebrew and the movie file off of the SD card adapter for the GameCube.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm just playing through Pokemon Crystal for my first time on the Game Boy player, and the GBI interface, the Game Boy interface is an incredible program. Once again, that has made a lot of this stuff actually possible for you to for us to see it on stream and everything like that.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Crystal. That is one of the good stories to tell about this whole system. Is
Please.
that is another game where that improved this whole system of emulation, because Crystal has a custom cartridge. Not many of the cartridges for the Game Boy have this, where they have RTC on the cartridge, which has its own clock
I learned.
source.
Yes. I only stream it. I only play it at night, so I haven't been able to hit some of the timed elements because it only
Oh,
works
no.
during the day. So anyway, yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So it has that like system with for day night, and the clock chips are on the cartridge. It's not sourcing the clock for that real time chip off of the Game Boy Advance. It's got its own thing on the cartridge. So every single Crystal cartridge is a different task. If you want to task Pokemon Crystal, you have to find out like how wrong your clock is on your Crystal cart, and then make a task that is like following that deviation in the RNG caused by that chip. And we actually made the emulator possible to do that. So like before we did all this work in 2018, it would be completely infeasible. It would be like if you asked somebody if they could do that, they would just laugh at you. It sounds completely ridiculous. And somebody actually, Mr. went and made a function in the emulator to be able to do that, and then made the tasks and made it play back accurate to my cartridge, so that we can now do shows of Crystal for 3 hours with 2 clock sources.
That's so wild. And no desync. I mean, it blows my mind. It leads me to believe that at some point we're going to have to do a Games Done Classic on Pokemon, because the evolutions that we've seen, no pun intended, of where the game was even just 5 or 10 years ago to where, and I should say games. So many runs have been they keep getting. I mean, every time you see somebody put out a PB or you see a new task, it's mind-boggling what kind of stuff is added in. It's kind of wild.
The optimization in the RTA scene is extremely wild and fun to follow because of that sort of the search space for what you need to do to improve things is so large. So many people are constantly finding new things, even on the oldest games. And yeah, I completely agree. It's a great space to look for classic things that have shown up. And I'm not even talking about TASBot, like all the other different Pokemon runs.
Well, as I watch back this, it reminds me, this is the last, AGDQ 2020 was the last time that we were in person for an event. And obviously there's a bit of sadness that comes about with that. But one of the things that I remember probably more than anything that happened at AGDQ 2020, and it may have just been me, obviously, but was a run of Super Mario Maker 2 by TASBot. And before we start this video and get it going, it's kind of an interesting moment in history, because I don't think we had seen anything like this before. And so, Duengo, I'm going to ask you and what were some of the thoughts you had before you even decided to go down this route and this avenue with Super Mario Maker 2?
Well, the first was, what consequences are there? So every other run we've talked about has been for a console that was designed quite some time ago. Even the Nintendo DS was, our early aughts? It was not a thing that we had to worry about where we were using a brand new console until this run, because we did this on the Nintendo Switch, and we made it possible to take this hardware and play back a tool-assisted speedrun that is obviously not human effort on a real console on a leaderboard that was connected to the internet. And that made us pause substantially. We're very, very open. I mentioned earlier that I'm the president of the North Bay Linux Users Group. I'm an advocate for open source software, open hardware. All of the stuff we have done is generally published in a way where anyone can copy it, except this. Because this is dangerous. What we're doing here by playing Super Mario Maker 2 legitimately on a console is something that could be abused to manipulate leaderboards. And yeah, feel free to start the run if you'd like.
Yeah.
What this run in particular gave me so much heartburn, because we were risking a mass casualty event of Nintendo possibly shutting down the entire Super Mario Maker community over cheating, or a lot of other very, very bad possibilities of Nintendo not doing anything and rampant cheating persisting. Either one of those outcomes would have been absolutely terrifyingly bad. So we were super cagey. You can look there on screen. There's an actual black box. I kid you not, ran the cables into a literal black box. It was just a little toolbox we cut sides into to make sure that you couldn't tell what we were doing. A year later, I'm not nearly as paranoid about describing what we had to do. But at the same time, there are some people in our community that are extremely worried about the consequences. And you're going to see right here what's happening in this video. I don't know if Ty Kevin wants to pop in about it.
I was there live, and it was absolutely ridiculous to see it happening live, but I don't have too much more to say on the technical aspects of what we did, or the run and lead up to it. I do know I was... the main nervousness I had about the event was making sure that my block, because this was the first time that I presented an entire block of TASBot as the presenter, and so I was mostly nervous just doing that aspect, having to speak in front of as the main guy, the guy with the runner badge, in front of the whole audience. But then Dwango halfway through the week is well, we got another thing we're gonna sneak in there on the last day, or we're gonna give it its own day, so you don't have to worry about the pressure of that. I'm like, oh well, that really helps.
I can talk about that part a little bit.
Yeah, Onosaurus, why don't you go for it?
Yeah, and this will not lead me in a very favorable light, and that is okay.
So yeah, about not doing anything last minute. No.
This bent that rule a little bit.
No. We all love Dwango. I don't think this will leave you in a poor light. But the there's a couple things. First of all, that what TI Kevin 83 mentioned is this is his first time presenting. We're starting a sort of transition where, of course, Dwango can and will still present things, but we want people to know that TASBot content can be presented by a variety of people in case, he's unavailable, has real life things to take care of, to have multiple people who are prepared to present. And TI Kevin 83 has done an excellent job stepping up and helping to present. Also, who helped present this run specifically was Milos. Special shout out to him. Yeah, he made sure that the hardware, he sort of made his own hardware, got it together. Not made his own hardware. He made a version of the hardware.
Oh, by the way, before
guys,
we go on, the reason everything looks weird right now is because this is a human trying just to pass this first section of the level and showing exactly how crazy difficult it is. And
this is not
just any human.
TASBot playing. This is Pangaea Panga attempting a run that TASBot is going to attempt.
Yes, and what Panga, as he's often known as, what Panga's doing right here is basically he's just demonstrating that, oh, there is another path that's much more doable by humans. That way, so if we make a path that is doable by humans, and then I want to make sure I don't forget to go back to the hardware, but while we're here, if we make a path that is doable by humans and is faster than the TAS-only route, then that basically guarantees, that's the solution to, hey, how can we make something that's frame perfect and can be optimized, but humans can still have the leaderboards. That's how. Basically the creator of the replay device would never try and task that human route, just the other route. And that's how we can keep the leaderboards happy. But back to hardware. So there's a member of the community, Knflurpn, KNFLRPN. When asked why he chose that name, I love his answer, so I really want to share it with everyone. I asked, where'd the name Knflurpn come from? He said, well, it sounds really good in front of the word gherkin, like the pickle. So he could say Knflurpn gherkin. That is his reason where his name comes from. So I think that's fantastic. He said it took him months to develop the hardware and to develop this level about a month. Now, he originally designed it on an FPGA, which is it's a certain type of hardware that is, for this discussion, not an Arduino. And then he said, he was designing this all just for fun, unrelated to GDQ, just designing this device. And then he heard, I believe it was from Dwango, about a week before, hey, we'd really like to show this all at GDQ. And so he was like, okay. Sure, how can we make it happen? It was ported to an Arduino on parts that Milos could produce. That's what I meant by him getting the hardware together. He got together an Arduino-based board that was able to make it happen. During the last week, they crammed the hardware redesign, the software redesign, and the presentation planning to make it all possible. It was successfully done maybe 2 or 3 times at the venue beforehand, and here we go. These are all pixel perfect jumps here. There's many other frame perfect tricks and such. There's so much to say. So I personally looked into this about a month or 2 before Knflurpn, and what we learned was that the game runs at about 60 hertz. The game pulls a USB controller at about 125 hertz. And I looked into it because I was teaching my device how to replay with a GameCube. So I'm like, hey, I can use that GameCube adapter that Smash players love. And it turns out, using a logic analyzer, I determined that pulls the GameCube adapter at 833 times per second. So we have this 60 hertz game polling, we have 125 hertz USB polling, and an 833 hertz GameCube controller polling. Basically, it was all completely decoupled. It's kind of like the SNES multiple clock issue, kind of, in that different things are happening at different rates, and how can we guarantee that the correct input gets there at the correct time? These were the issues that had to be overcome, and these are the issues that Knflurpn was able to solve to make this happen. So really, it was absolutely incredible that it was able to all come together and make this happen.
Another interesting little behind the scenes thing I wanted to mention about this event that I was just reminded of is how at previous events, like the first one I went to, it was at AGDQ, or I think it was, I was thinking of SGDQ 2018, probably when we did Super Metroid at 0%. We were in the private practice rooms whenever we were doing the week's setup, and I think we did the same thing with TASBot, and we got kind of kicked out of that arrangement because of being way too rowdy.
It got loud in that room.
and loud in the private practice. So we were not very private about our side of the practicing. Anyway, so at this event, though, we were back in the public space. We set up a little booth area in a corner of the public practice area. And then but then this part, the Super Mario Maker creation team was not next to the public space of the TASBot teams organizing.
Yeah, we didn't want anyone seeing the hardware.
Which I think is really interesting because now we have hindsight. We're a year out, and I remember seeing this and hearing what you were talking about it, and being afraid of Nintendo, suing everyone. Nintendo has been, historically protective over their intellectual property.
Ninjas are real.
But it's interesting looking back on this with hindsight, in that the other part of this that was a little bit controversial, I guess, is oh no, this, as you mentioned, Dwango, does this break the leaderboards? Does this break, can we believe, this and that has happened and these type of things? And I mean, I could be speaking out of turn, but it doesn't seem like it has. And I'm curious if you feel the same way or if you've observed anything like that.
So effectively, the concerns were valid, and we had every reason to take those precautions. On the other hand, because we took those precautions, we have not seen a massive destruction of the leaderboard. There's also one other element of this. There is a specific thing we've been dancing around in this conversation here, as well as an aspect we danced around in the Ars Technica article on this subject, and danced around even at the GDQ stage last time. We did have an extra piece of hardware that we haven't mentioned here that did need to be used. And ultimately, there are a number of people now that understand what it takes to do this. We simply haven't advertised it widely. But at the other on the other hand, as Onosaurus pointed out, Conflorpin spent a lot of time manually tweaking that run to make that happen. So in other words, the amount of effort to pull off a heist like this, for very limited benefit, I might add, is a lot of hardware knowledge, a lot of wasted time, not wasted time, but a lot of time investment. Ultimately, it hasn't been worth the trouble. It's difficult enough that it just hasn't come up. There's an alternate future that could have resulted in it being trivial, easy to reproduce, and a complete destruction of the leaderboards.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning it. I forgot to mention that, yes, because there's no Switch emulator, just to be very clear, yes, Conflorpin did build this hand by hand, hand-built, frame by frame, built the inputs to make this run possible.
Yeah. Or at least no Switch emulator accurate enough to even remotely think about.
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
But the other
it might
thing,
look quote-unquote sloppy, but overall that was just a matter of him literally doing all of these inputs by typing in, go left for this many frames, okay, press right for 2 frames. This is all very, very carefully scripted together by hand, and a total pain in the butt to make.
One other thing that made Mario Maker 2 a great candidate is its, I don't want to say lack of randomness, but when you start a given level, it actually has a set RNG seed. So unlike some runs where it's based on a real-time clock, like we were discussing earlier with certain Pokemon games, every time the level loaded, you started in the same state. I do not believe that was true for Mario Maker 1. I believe that is only true for Mario Maker 2.
Correct.
Still, there are variable load times, but by using certain things like positioning yourself against the wall, and also, maybe you don't know when the level loaded, but let's say you go to a certain place and then go through a door. Well, at that point, once you go through the door, you're sort of in a set state. There were lots of things specific to Mario Maker 2 that could be taken advantage of to reliably know what state you were in and base actions off of that.
It's something that I still think of to this day, and I'm glad to see, as a fan of Mario and all these things, I'm glad to see that it didn't take us down a path that might have been destructive, but instead it was something that, as I look back on hindsight, I'm like, this is an incredible presentation that was put on, and the amount of effort that had to go in just to protect keeping, we're all gamers. We want to protect that our games and things like that. And so the fact that you all took those extra steps to do so, I think is greatly appreciated, because who knows what could have happened had you not taken the steps that you did. I guess that's what I'm
and necessary, truly, because we want to foster a community of togetherness, as it were, between the TAS community and the real-time speedrunning community. This could have absolutely destroyed those relationships. I had some long conversations with folks like Grand Pooh Bear, who was worried, legitimately worried, that this would impact his livelihood. This is not just some, I know it sounds so crazy to say, it's not just a game when it is a game, but let's be honest, this is what he does, what many of the Twitch streamers were actively working on over the course of 2020. In theory, that's what they thought they would be doing. They ended up doing the same thing, but in the midst of a pandemic. But this was their livelihood, and I didn't want to play loose with that. If anything, I wanted to make sure that we were going above and beyond in a paranoid sort of way to make sure that there was no possibility what we were doing interfered with them. And that really is the cornerstone, going all the way back 18 years ago to 2003, when the first task came out and it wasn't labeled. We're not going to make that mistake again. It's why Biscuit, when he started task videos, made labeling and saying this is not human effort. He made that such a big deal because we've already been down this road of seeing what happens when tool-assisted content is passed off as human effort. It's never good. So we don't want to make those mistakes at any point. We want to foster a good working relationship between the task community and the real-time speedrunning community. And this was truly necessary.
Well, I appreciate that you did. And as we start to wrap this whole thing up, everyone grab a pet if you've got one.
I was going to say, can you believe how well behaved all the animals were this screen? When I was, so this is something I do. My day job is professor. And when I give remote lectures, I often roll out the chair to see if a cat wants to sit in the chair and join me for the lecture, as a co-pilot. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I started with one cat in the tech check. Suddenly it became two. They've been cuddling and grooming each other, and it's so lovely. And if you look at T.I. Kevin's screen, we have his absolutely lovely dog. And
yes, this is Jerry stream. Stream meet Jerry.
Yeah.
Jerry is my dachshund beagle.
And Dwango as well. We have our lovely animal companions. Our serotonin. Our companions.
That's what happens after 3 hours of dealing with technicalities and all this technology and everything. We need the pup interaction. Okay, so first of all, let me just thank all of you for joining us. Dwango AC, Ty-Kevin83, Onosaurus, and everyone in the chat. These things aren't possible without all of you. Oh, but there we go. We got a... first, Dwango, are you still with us? I can't.
Internal
I don't have
temperature
your
high. Allow it to cool.
I fixed it.
Dwango, where would you like, here's our plug section. Where would you like to send people? Tell us a little bit about where people, if they want to get more involved with this stuff, where can they go? What can they do?
So the best place to go is discord.tas.bot. I am always happy when new folks join. That's the main core of our community. So if you're on Discord, just look up TASBot as the community or discord.tas.bot. We do have the tas.bot website that's kind of going through some changes since we haven't yet managed to get it quite back up to speed since task giving. But you can go to runs.tas.bot or run.tas.bot to see runs that you can do on real hardware. We built that because TASVideos.org, which is the main site for tool-assisted speedruns in emulators, wasn't equipped to handle those types of files yet. We hope to eventually merge that collection at some point. I am still the senior ambassador of TASVideos, joined with me by Ty-Kevin83, who is also an ambassador of TASVideos. We are both there representing that TASVideos community. As always, if you want to see tool-assisted speedruns, that's the right place to go. Definitely feel free to reach out if you want to get your own replay device. Check in with Onosaurus at store.tas.bot. You can buy the TAS TM32 board that lets you do NES, SNES, N64, and now GameCube, and also some Genesis runs. By all means, feel free to get into replay devices yourself. If you want to make a TAS, the TASVideos.org website has plenty of information on that. I know that was a whole lot of information, but last but not least, if you want to help document some of the things that we've done in the past that requires so much more explanation than I could possibly give even in 3 hours, if you want to help us do videos where we're breaking down how we pulled off some of this stuff, please head on over to discord.tas.bot. There's a TASBot Revisited channel. And check out Dwango AC on YouTube if you're willing, if I've earned it. Obviously, I'm the presentation lead, as it were, and the main organizer, but as has been alluded throughout this particular episode, I can't do it without people like Ty-Kevin83, and I specifically had Ty-Kevin83 take on additional leadership roles in the event that I was ever to die, because this community needs to be more than just about me. I'm more than happy to continue to serve in that role of the main ambassador and the main connection point between the communities, but ultimately this is way, way more than just me as a person, so huge credit to him. Onosaurus has taken the lead on hardware. Thank you very much for all of your work. I think I have finally said what I needed to say, so I will leave it to you guys for the rest of it.
Perfect. Well, and speaking of them, Ty-Kevin83, where can people find you? Where do you want to send them?
Thanks, Lat. So we've got my stream, Ty-Kevin83. I'll just say something like a quick hello in the chat again here. for anybody who wants to drop by the TAI-83 stream, feel free to go there. I will be working on Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons tonight, probably, or in the next couple of days. We have a TASBot sync of that in the progress. And we've already synced Oracle of Ages. So that will be going up on my YouTube. You can find TAI-83 speedruns on YouTube. That Oracle of
Great
Ages
Zelda game.
task should be going up in the next couple of hours. And
nice.
playing back on console with like the whole TASBot GBI setup. You can
Such
also
a good
find
game.
me. Yeah, it really is a good one. You can also find me at TAI-83 on Twitter, and I have a Discord. You can always just find me through the discord.tas.bot, but I also have my own personal Discord, which you can find linked in a lot of my recent YouTube videos.
Awesome. And then the person who joined us this time, Onosaurus, anything you'd like to send anywhere, your store, anything like that?
Oof. Well, Dwango already mentioned the store, so I'm not going to beat that to death. But this is my first time ever on Games Done Quick stream, so it was nice to... I'm really thankful that you invited me to come. Happy to be a part of it. It's different going from behind the scenes to having a face and whatnot. Come a long way from the early days of me sitting in Discord with the Moss and CompuCat trying to get NES protocol to work. In the effort of proper attribution, I'm just going to list a couple names real quick because
Please do.
It can't hurt.
Please do.
In addition to CompuCat and Skippy. Oh, I didn't mention. Yeah, Skippy as well. The Moss 3212. Who did most of the Python, pretty much all the Python. I write the C code that drives the microcontroller with a few of my colleagues, and the Moss did the Python front end, so it's more accessible.
The Moss is a huge unsung hero that quite honestly deserves a whole lot more credit than I have given him already.
And I particularly appreciate what he does because that was kind of like my old job. When I joined and I said, oh, I wrote the command line interface for TaskLink was kind of the way I introduced myself. I sort of moved on to hardware, and the Moss does that, what I used to do, plus a whole lot more. Incredible. Crafted Cart, who made the original version of this case. Previous replay device creators, like I said, Total, Micro 500, and True, who taught me what I needed to know and allowed me to do this because I didn't know diddly squat about hardware and replay devices until then. Budo, Rasteri, Tien Majorly, Ilari, Cericium, Arcombs, Saurian, Durf, and SSPX have all contributed in some way, shape, or form to making this replay device the success it is. So thank you, everyone. This is not about one individual. This is all about the community effort. Thank you so much, everyone.
That's so great, highlighting so many people, because these things just don't happen without people like you and everyone out there watching and supporting and in contributing to making these things possible. Thank you all for watching. If you are curious, so Games Done Classic is going to be looking back at all these moments from GDQs and things like that. The link in the chat is a forum that you can actually submit what you consider some legendary moments you'd like to see us take a deep dive into for the next Games Done Classic, which is February 21st, and I'm not quite ready to tell you what it's going to be on the topic. I will tell you that you won't want to miss it. It's going to be a fun one, and not everyone has fully locked in. So before we get everything going, I can't announce it quite yet. But just know that it's going to be fun. If you have any ideas or some moments that you want to see with the people that made these things happen, please feel free to submit that form and tell us what you think. Finally, I'm just going to mention it one more time because this is the last day of January. AGDQ 2021 online, we completed it earlier this month, and we raised a total of $2.77 million. That doesn't have to be it. You still have time. What do you got, like 6 or 7 hours left? Everyone who donated today, anybody who's subscribed or who donated bits or cheered or anything like that, the GDQ portion of that will also be donated to the Prevent Cancer Foundation. It's just, especially considering our times that we're in, it's amazing to see that everyone has shown up and been willing to contribute to such an important cause, and that is what the mission of the Prevent Cancer Foundation. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out. Once again, my name is Lat Mackey. If you're at all interested in stuff like this, I have a podcast myself, the sequencebreakpodcast.com. spreadruns.com. You can go there. Dwango's been on it. A whole bunch of other folks. 51 episodes now. Retro RGB Bob is the next person they'll be releasing next week. Feel free to stop on by and have a good night. See y'all later. Bye-bye. Take care. Thanks for being here. See you later. Bye-bye.